It seems we've hit that point already, my friends. We have done so many different guides on the channel, and FFT, the Ivalice Chronicles, has been out for long enough that people are coming to me and asking for guides that I've already made and looking for information that we've already covered. So, to facilitate making it easier for everyone to find whatever it is that they are looking for, I have combined all of my guides that I've released thus far into this one giant mega compilation. You'll have timestamps in the description. There'll be chapters in the actual video timeline, so if there's something in particular you're looking for, you'll find it there. We've got tips, we've got tricks, we've got ways to steal and poach and how to use the Zodiac system and examples of how to put together squads. I think whether you're new or old, you're going to find something as a player of FFT here. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my ongoing coverage of Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles, whether it be gameplay, guides, news, etc., then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Also, huge shout out to all of my channel supporters. I know my schedule got a little funky, so I didn't quite get to have the shout out in over the weekend as I usually do. We'll have that at the end of this video. And also, thanks to everyone who came out to the stream at the time of recording last night, where we broke 1,000 concurrent viewers. First time ever. Absolutely insane. I cannot emphasize enough how absolutely insane that is. So thank you to all of you for showing your support and coming out and enjoying Tactics with me. We're going to be continuing to do so for a good long while. So today, 15 combat tips. We have a fairly wide range of things here, from the most absolute basics for the newest of folks getting into potentially their first tactics game ever with this release of FFT, as well as old heads who want to kind of brush up on their skills a little bit, and people who maybe haven't played the game since they were kids back in the mid-90s. Hopefully there's something here for everyone. I have chapter titles, as always, in the description and in the play bar for the video, so you can jump around to what you want to see. Before we get to the first tip, do keep in mind that I am playing on Tactician difficulty in the enhanced mode of the Ivalice Chronicles. That said, all of these tips should largely be backportable to lower difficulties and the classic mode as well. I'll specify if that's not the case, but I don't think there really is anything that would be that much of a difference, but that way you know, if it works on Tactician, it's probably going to work on the lower difficulties as well, because that is the highest difficulty. Starting right off, I always like to start each of these videos with this. I always get some criticism for it, but I think it definitely bears repeating for the newest of players. Simply just divide and conquer, man. It's a classic of any sort of turn-based strategy game. If you can cut off one or two enemy units from the pack and gang up on them to bring them down quickly, you will get yourself a massive force advantage. An enemy that's alive on 1 HP can still hit you, can still move block you, can still potentially do some sort of spell to support their allies. That makes them dangerous. If you can take one dude, or two dudes, or monsters, or the like, and just take them out, it's going to really put the enemy on the back foot. Maps in Final Fantasy Tactics are fairly well set up for this, with lots of terrain and choke points and ways you can kind of outmaneuver the enemy, draw them into traps, and then close ranks around them. So if you have the opportunity to do so, take it. It will absolutely make your life significantly easier. Number two, another simple one, but one that actually came to me in my early days of playing Final Fantasy Tactics, courtesy of my dad: let the enemy come to you. There are a lot of maps where if you just charge straight ahead into the fray, the enemy will very easily get the drop on you and get the first hit, which will again immediately put you on the back foot. There are certain maps in particular where there are enemy mages who are just relishing the potential opportunity for you to walk into their range and for them to then drop nukes on you. There's certain summoners on certain maps that will absolutely take advantage of you being a little too enthusiastic about charging up the front line. So, when you have the opportunity, hang back, let the enemy come to you. Not only does that keep you out of their range, which is very nice, it also gives you a turn or two that I call a staging turn, where you can actually apply buffs, focus, put on haste, maybe start charging some other spells, apply protect, all sorts of different fun stuff that you can do as you get more and more powerful characters, and then you can go into the fight even more prepared than if you just went in screaming and flailing your arms around. It's a very simple concept, but one that I see people kind of fail to realize more often than you would expect, especially if they're new. Number three, make sure that you are facing the enemy whenever possible. Do not show your back to the enemy. It's a classic of any sort of martial training across the entirety of human history, and it's still true in our video games today. The big reason that this matters in tactics is because you do get better evade rates if you are being attacked head-on as opposed to the side or the back, especially if you have cloaks, shields, and the like. Whether this means that you're forming battle lines with your troops so that no one can actually get to your sides, or you're positioning yourself intelligently in the terrain, or you just know, well, I'm going to get approached no matter what. Better to actually make it so that my head is facing towards the enemy so I can see what's about to happen to me. It's simple, but again, thinking about how you're positioning yourself and if you're actually going to be able to get proper facing going on is a very simple thought process to train yourself to do so that you wind up taking less damage and potentially evading more hits over the course of the entire game. The sooner you start doing it, the better. Alongside this, number 4, attack from behind whenever possible. If it's going to work on you, it's going to work on the enemy as well. And if you can get to their back to be able to hit them, especially with melee attacks, you will be far less likely to run into an enemy evading, parrying, blocking, etc. As someone who has ungodly amounts of hours in this game over all of its releases in the last almost 30 years, I cannot tell you the number of feels bads that I've had when I just kind of have to gamble on trying to hit an enemy from the front or the side, only to see them raise that shield or raise that sword or just dodge out of the way, and my entire attack has gone to waste. I have lost entire battles because of one parry or dodge. Do not leave yourself open to that if you are at all able to do so. Get those back attacks, as long as you're not putting yourself in an extremely vulnerable position to do so. For number 5, this is a little bit of a split between combat techniques and army building techniques, but I do think it bears to put here. Spam quick, cheap abilities like Stone, Focus, and Potion for easy JP gains. So we'll talk about this a lot more in the actual character building video, but I think it is important to discuss here since it is in combat. As you do actions, any action, you'll gain experience for your actual level and JP and job experience for your actual job or the class that you're in. Job points in particular are probably the single most important resource in the game, as they are what will allow you to not only learn new abilities, some of which can be very expensive in your current job, but also unlock more new powerful jobs as you proceed throughout the game. So, barring very specific circumstances where everything is like really down to the quick, like you need to be maximizing every possible action, not wasting time, using your most powerful skills every single turn. If you're not in a situation like that, taking the opportunity to be like, well, this character's not doing anything, but his buddy's missing 5 HP standing right next to him, we'll toss him a potion. Does he even really need that healing? No, but it does give your unit that XP and JP that is so vital. Same thing with stones. If you're not doing anything with your turn, toss a stone at your buddy for 4 damage. You'll get a bunch of XP and JP, and he's really not going to be any worse for wear. There's lots of little actions you can take like this as you actually move into engagement with the enemy to just continue to build your characters up and keep them from just sitting around doing nothing. A wasted turn is a sad turn, especially when you can be gaining a lot of XP. Number 6, charging characters take extra damage and are guaranteed to be hit. If you're not aware, there are certain spells and abilities that will cause your character to go into a quote-unquote charge state, where they'll take like a super Dragon Ball Z power-up stance and stare menacingly at someone until like their big attack goes off, right? This is one of the more interesting aspects of Final Fantasy Tactics overall game flow, in that your best abilities don't just trigger. You have to actually time them and plan for them, and most importantly, protect the character that is using them, because they are very vulnerable when they are charging an attack like this. You're guaranteed to be hit, you can't parry, you can't dodge, none of that, and you're going to take more damage if you are charging when you get hit, sometimes a significantly higher amount of damage. This of course means you can take great advantage of this fact. You're suddenly able to rush up on a vulnerable enemy who's in the middle of a charge, but it also means that if you leave like your squishy black mage vulnerable and there's someone with a sword that's going to run up on them while they're trying to cast Fire, you're probably not going to be casting Fire because they're going to be dead on the ground. This is just a key thing to look out for, whether it's for protecting your own guys or taking advantage of what the enemy is doing to eke out that little bit extra damage that is going to sometimes be vital, especially if you're on Tactician. Next up, check the Brave stat on monsters and enemies that have reaction skills. The higher the stat, the more likely it is that they will be able to counter or do other reaction abilities. This is pretty self-explanatory. As you level up and get new abilities, you'll see you have reaction abilities. For example, Squires have Counter Tackle as your earliest example of a reaction ability. And each of these has their own formula for how quickly and how often they'll trigger. We're not going to get into that right now. The shorthand that you need to know is if an enemy has a reaction ability, their Brave stat is likely what's going to cause it to trigger. There's some outliers, but not that early in the game, and you'll know them when you see them. The biggest and most relevant time that you're going to want to pay attention to this is when you are fighting monsters, as all monsters come with the counter skill innately, which means they can just get a free full power attack on you if you attack them in melee. And especially on Tactician, they will hit you back really hard, probably harder than you're hitting them. So keep an eye on the little brave stat you can see right here on the enemy's status bar. That will give you an idea of how likely they are to counterattack you. The counter skill itself is a flat percentage. So if something has a 48 brave, it has a 48% chance to counterattack you. Seeing as how monster stats are random, especially when you run into them in random battles or training missions, this is just going to be a good shorthand method to be able to tell if it's kind of safe, quote unquote, to attack a monster in melee, or if you want to whittle it down a little bit with magic or bows, or even just throwing stones before you get in there with your sword and board, you know? Sometimes there's a goblin that'll have like 80 brave and he will slap the crap out of you. You will be stunned 3 ways to Sunday and you won't even know what happened to you. So just keep an eye on that brave. Number 8, and speaking of archers, archers get longer range when firing bows from higher ground and less range when firing from lower ground. This is one of the only mechanics like this in the game, so I think it bears discussion early, especially because Archer is one of the earlier jobs you can get, and it got pretty significant buffs in the Ivalice Chronicles, so I actually do recommend spending some time with archers if you kind of dismissed them before. But whenever possible, you want to get your archer to the highest ground they can reach so they have maximum range over the battlefield. Some battlefields, like the Door to Trade City, if you actually get to the top of the main like tower skyscraper with your archer, you can hit almost the entire battlefield. Effectively, the entire battlefield where enemies are actually going to be, which is obviously a phenomenal force multiplier. They can't get to you, and you're just able to rain arrows down from on high. It's very powerful. It's very fun. Really kind of a power fantasy, especially for me as an archery instructor. So put your archers on high ground whenever possible. If you're going to be charging up like a slope for a map, maybe don't consider bringing your archer at all unless you can see a very quick and easy way to get them on like a small outcrop to actually give them an equal range at the very least. Number 9, weather and terrain impact magic damage. This is an interesting one and one that people often forget about or don't realize at all. But this game has weather effects and different types of terrain for a reason. And one of the earliest ways that this is going to come into play is when you're looking at elemental magic, specifically thunder, blizzard, and fire with your black mages. Once you know what to look for, it is extremely simple. If it's raining, use thunder magic. It'll be stronger. If it's snowing, use blizzard magic. It'll be stronger. If you're in a desert or in a lava map, use fire magic. It'll be stronger. It's that simple. This is a nice, easy way to be able to boost your damage output, and let's face it, your black mages should have access to all 3 elements anyway, even if you wind up specializing them a little bit, which we'll talk about a little bit further down the line here. It's just a nice way to be able to be like, oh hey, it's raining in the Door to Trade City. Thunder! It makes you feel like an absolute badass when you do it, because the damage numbers really spike pretty decently. Number 10, always bring backup healers, preferably some items and some magic to diversify. This is most important on Tactician difficulty, but even on lower difficulties, you never want to find yourself in a situation where your one healer gets dropped either early in the fight or at a critical junction when you need them to heal or res somebody, and realize that you're pretty much up a creek without a paddle. I still, to this day, do this to myself because I get so lost in training, like, well, this character is going to have these specific skills to train, and this character is going to have these specific skills for their build. And then suddenly I realize I've got one dude with items, and he just got blown up by a monk. So don't do that to yourself. Always have at least 2 sources of both healing and revives on hand. This will get easier as you progress further into the game because you'll have more jobs that have some random access to this type of stuff. Having someone with some white magic and having someone with items, especially throw items, like even just straight up a normal chemist, will be a huge boon to you. Trust me. Do not neglect your healing. Number 11, if possible, let enemies fully expire so you can grab their crystals. It's just free abilities. Again, this kind of could go into the team building video if you wanted, but it's combat relevant, so we're putting it here. As you drop enemies, you'll see they get little hearts above their heads, right? And as turns go by, those hearts will tick down. If you haven't encountered this in-game already, once you lose all of those hearts and their turn comes back around again, one of 2 things will happen. They'll either turn into a treasure chest, and if they're a human enemy, you'll get one of their pieces of gear at random, or if they're a monster, you'll get an item, or they'll turn into a crystal. For monsters, all this will do is restore your HP and MP when you step on it, which is huge. Don't get me wrong. Like that, yeah, all this will do. Trust me, that is extremely good, and I have won fights off of the back of being able to get a clutch crystal grab. But what you really want to look for is a human enemy that you can inherit a bunch of skills from. This is a system that's evolved a lot over the years, but now it's just flat. Enemy has skills, you pick up its crystal, you can inherit every single skill that your character is applicable to learn. This can mean, especially later in the game, you have like a crystallized black mage and you walk up with a mage of your own who maybe hasn't done a bunch of black magic. You could just fill out like 3/4 of their spell list if you get lucky. And with the amount of time and grinding you have to do to unlock some of these abilities at any sort of like reasonable time frame, being able to just snatch them out of the ether like that is so awesome. It lets you do so much more with your characters. It is a huge power boost. So when you can, run out the clock, pick up some crystals. Your characters will get a lot stronger, a lot faster. Number 12, shoot the medic. Whether he be a chemist or a chocobo, enemy healing is dangerous for you. Just like I was saying, it's very important for you to bring plenty of healing of your own. Any healers on the enemy team must be a priority target for you to bring down, especially if you're in a story battle where you're fighting bosses or anything. There's one particular boss battle against Weegraf near the tail end of Chapter 1 where he has a chocobo with him, and if you leave that chocobo alive and Weegraf has any amount of decent damage on him, it will run up and it will heal him, and it will heal him for more than you're comfortable with, given as how you're probably having a hard time damaging the guy in the first place. Same thing as if you're fighting a boss like a big powerful knight with heavy armor and they have a couple of priests and they start spamming cure on them. Or there's chemists running around throwing items. It's like, you can kind of get the combat flow going. Even if you're not doing a ton of damage, you can start chipping away at these major enemies, only to then have them get a big heal from out of nowhere. It is so rough to try and deal with, and it very well could end a fight for you. So whenever possible, bring down the healers. It'll make your life much easier. Number 13, know your target priority. Undead last, bombs first, etc. This is partially new to this version of Final Fantasy Tactics with the Ivalice Chronicles, as there are a bunch of monsters that have received changes to the way their core functionality is. However, at its baseline, there's always certain monsters and certain enemies, but this is definitely key for monsters as well, where you want to be able to know what targets to bring down first. The reason for this is enemies like undead, like in pretty much all Final Fantasy games, once you down them, they have a chance to get back up. Once their hearts tick down, they could actually just stand right back up with full health, rather than crystallizing or turning into a treasure chest, which is nasty, because some of the undead enemies can actually be pretty rough, especially skeletons early in the game. So you kind of want to hold off on maybe downing them, put some damage on them so they're easy to finish, but then kind of let them run around and do their thing. While on the other side of the map, you're dealing with much more important targets like, say, bombs. Because bombs, again, in true Final Fantasy fashion, will self-destruct. Usually, in most games, and in past versions of FFT, this would mean that, they die, in the process dealing a ton of damage to you and your team. Not anymore. Now they just lose a chunk of their health and then keep on going and can potentially keep biting you or using other abilities and finishing off your now weakened allies. So, really, you want to drop bombs as quickly as possible. Like, if you're going to target a bomb, have everyone target it and just remove it immediately so it can't have the chance to blow up on you. There's, of course, a ton of different examples of this, bigger and tougher and scarier monsters and enemy humans that you will run into over the course of the game. You kind of have to learn this for yourself, but it is a very important thing to learn. Good target priority will make you take way less damage and potentially lose less characters over the course of a fight, or just make the fight go faster in general if you're dealing with a bunch of undead. Number 14, speaking of things like undead and whatnot, enemy weaknesses are key to exploit. Holy and healing on undead, ice on goblins and minotaurs, etc. This is a staple of all Final Fantasy games, and really, like, most RPGs in general, if Pokemon says hello, where you will find, as you go through the game, certain monsters and enemies will be more or less vulnerable to certain types of elemental magic. Humans don't have any innate resistances or weaknesses, but can gain them due to their equipment, so you're going to want to pay attention to that. And then there are plenty of monsters that do have innate weaknesses and resistances. It seems like most of the time, Blizzard is your go-to. There are a lot more enemies that are weak to Blizzard than anything else, which makes it a very powerful set of spells to know. But there's always going to be edge cases or other elements that are more or less effective. So take your time, learn what seems to be doing more or less damage to certain types of enemies, and then exploit that as you go through the game, and monsters get scarier and scarier and more powerful. Of course, beyond just elemental magic, as mentioned, undead are weak to holy and healing. Again, classic to Final Fantasy. So if you have a really nasty skeleton that you're trying to finish off, maybe like you didn't really put too much damage into it because you're too busy killing everything else, but now he's bearing down on you, just huck a phoenix down at him. It'll one-shot him. Easy. Or just chip away at him with cure and potions. It'll do just normal damage. So take advantage of these different weaknesses. You're definitely going to be happy that you did. Yesterday, we spoke about combat. Today, we speak about how to make sure that you can actually make it to combat and do interesting things while you do. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and let's talk some tips for character building in Final Fantasy Tactics. Today we are talking character and army building, from everything from what Brave and Faith actually do and how to raise them, to even the different ways that elements of magic interact with not only enemies, but the world around you. There's a lot to discuss, so let us begin. Number 1, Get vital skills from both Squire and Chemist before moving on to other jobs. I always like to start these videos with the most basic of the basic, and for any old head who knows Final Fantasy Tactics, as long as I've known Final Fantasy Tactics, this is the number one piece of advice that they will give to anyone and everyone. Squire and Chemist are the baseline not just for physical or magical classes, but for all jobs in general, as well as pretty much just gameplay in general for Final Fantasy Tactics. Squire is going to give you some of the most important base level movement and utility abilities you can get with things like JP boost, movement +1, focus for not only increasing your actual physical attack power, but also getting a ton of JP very quickly, and stone throw for a very basic low level, but solid enough range damage option. Chemist does the same with things like Potion and Phoenix Down, absolute must-haves for any character that's going to be fulfilling any sort of healing role, as well as great options like Auto Potion or the other more utility-based items to make sure that you have the survivability and the utility that you need to keep a particular character or the army as a whole going. As such, you want to make sure that you spend an appropriate amount of time in both of these jobs before you start moving a character into whatever their actual designated role is going to be. JP Boost in particular, despite the seeming changes to the spillover JP mechanic, which we'll talk about in a minute here, is still an absolute must-have. You get so much more JP with JP Boost equipped, and when JP is what allows you to learn all of your different abilities and level up your jobs to get new jobs, you can imagine that having that multiplier is going to be extremely valuable for you. Movement +1, just giving you extra move range, has an array of benefits that I don't need to tell you. Just being able to move farther is hugely beneficial. And then yeah, being able to just heal and res and heal when you get hit from Chemist, how can you go wrong with that? Number 2, Brave and Faith. Combat units want low faith, casters want high faith, both want high brave. So the bravery and faith mechanic is definitely one of the more interesting overall stat mechanics in Final Fantasy Tactics, and it probably deserves a video all on its own, to be perfectly honest with you, but just as a baseline understanding, this is what you need to know. Your physical melee characters, most of the time, want maximized Brave, as much as you can get, up to the cap of 97, because Brave dictates so much in terms of your physical damage output and your ability to use reaction commands. Some of the most powerful physical attack options in the game, such as Knight Swords, Brawler punching with monks, and Samurai with their katanas, are very reliant on Brave to maximize the damage that they can deal. And if you have high Brave and you attack with these options, you will see that you do crushing amounts of damage. As far as reaction abilities are concerned, I mean, who's the most likely to be able to take a hit and then react in combat? Your heavy melee fighters. So again, having high Brave to make sure that you're triggering things like counter tackle, Shira Hidori, etc. is absolutely vital. You will feel the difference if a character is in melee and has low Brave versus high Brave. But even for non-combat units, this is still extremely vital because, again, you want to be able to trigger those reaction abilities that may very well save your, say, Black Mage's life with much more reliability. So keeping your Brave high is extremely important. As far as Faith is concerned, it gets a little bit more interesting. Faith dictates both how accurate you are with magic and how likely your magic effects are to land, but also how much damage you deal and take when dealing with magical attacks. As such, you do want your mages to have high faith, you just also want to protect them from other mages because this is a two-way street. That said, a mage with maxed out faith, as high as you can safely get, around 90, 92, is going to deal crushing amounts of damage with magical attacks. On the flip side, having your melee fighters, or just your physical fighters, have low faith will then protect them from enemy mages' attacks. They'll still take damage, but nowhere near as much. So outside of specific scenarios where you're relying on a lot of magical buffs with a very magic-centric team, in which case you're going to want higher faith, it's good to have these types of characters be lower on faith. Speaking of the importance of Brave and Faith, we have number 3. When recruiting new warriors from the Warriors Guild, you can re-roll your options by fully backing out of the shop and re-entering. The two major use cases for this are, 1, looking for particular Zodiac signs if you're trying to do either roleplay stuff or really min-max your team, and 2, finding good Brave and Faith scores for all the reasons that we just outlined. We won't go through it again because we just talked about it, but if you are looking for particular Brave and Faith scores, if you want to hire a character for a specific role and you don't see those scores represented in the shop currently, just back out, go back in, you'll have a whole new array of characters to fish for, and eventually you will be able to find that perfect stat distribution. Number 4, keep items on everyone in the early game for easy JP gains and efficient healing. There's a lot to talk about in terms of actually grinding out JP and XP in Final Fantasy Tactics. It is a core part of the gameplay loop, but of course you also want to make sure that your characters are, like alive so that they can continue to get XP, and the items command does both of those for you. As we've touched on a couple of times here and in other videos, every time you take an action, you'll get XP and JP for that action. You want XP and JP so that your levels go up, you can get new jobs, get new abilities, etc. And using items for that task is great because then not only are you getting that XP and JP, you're also keeping your team alive. For a very significant portion of the game, just baseline Potion and Phoenix down will be more than enough to keep your team up and functional while also continuing to get you those gains. So I do highly recommend keeping the items command and even just those most basic of abilities on call for the majority of your team. You'll find way more opportunities to patch up little wounds and keep everyone functional while also leveling up a lot more than you would if you were just like waiting and not doing anything with your turn. Number 5, keep proper gear on and don't trust the outfitter. This is one that I see a lot of people run into because the shop has this very convenient feature where you can go to the dressing room or the fitting room and the game will just recommend the best gear that is currently on offer that can be equipped by the character that you currently have in the dressing room. Great, very convenient. I can see everything that I need to do. I can buy it all in one go and I can get back to the game. However, the outfitter is a devious bastard, and he doesn't care to tell you that many times there are actually better options for you amongst his stock of wares than what he is currently proposing to you. There's actually a much wider range of gear available in shops than you would expect if you're just using the fitting room all the time, and this issue stems from the fact that the game always wants to give you the best HP and damage items without consideration for maybe MP or what elemental affinities gear has or what special effects it might have for you, etc. One of the biggest examples of this is the fact that the outfitter will always recommend normal clothes or like leather armors for mages, completely ignoring the fact that there's an entire subset of robes which are the actual intended mage gear. Yes, they have lower HP, but they give you much higher MP so you can cast more spells, and as you get further into the game, you'll get very beneficial effects like boosts to your magic attack or other different types of elements, etc. As such, while the fitting room is definitely nice and it's a good way to expedite your shopping once you know what you're doing, you want to make sure that you're actually checking the inventory of the shop, especially each time it updates, to make sure that there's not some like cool niche piece of gear that you otherwise would have no clue about that would be better for one of your teammates. Number 6, and kind of tangentially related to the previous point, choose an element of magic for your black mage. The shop will offer rods with elemental affinity that will boost the associated spell. This is a fun one, and again, one that I see people miss very often, but each school of magic for black mages has an associated rod that you can get pretty early on, like 3 or 4 battles into chapter 1, that actually will boost a particular given school of magic or element of magic. So you've got a fire rod, a blizzard rod, and a thunder rod for fire, blizzard, and thunder magic respectively, of course. As such, by leaning into a particular school, even if your black mage does have the ability to use other spells, you can maximize your damage output by having the associated rod equipped. I in particular really like blizzard mages because there are a lot of enemies in the game that are weak to blizzard magic, so I will very often have a blizzard rod on a black mage for a long time, even once other quote-unquote better rods are available, because that lower level rod, while having maybe less stats, gives a unique boost to that element that I'm using. So if you feel like speccing out for a particular element in a black magic class, then finding the right rod to go with it is a must. Number 7, certain pieces of armor give stat bonuses. Check them regularly. Once you get near the end of Chapter 1, and then absolutely once you start getting into Chapter 2, you'll find a lot more gear on offer that has special effects or stat bonuses. For example, the headgear item gives you +1 to your physical attack stat, while the green beret item gives +1 to your speed stat, and different characters want different things. Of course, speed is good on everybody universally, but most stats in some way play into your damage capabilities as well. Physical attack is great for swords, axes, punching, etc., while things like longbows and knives actually want more speed than anything else to maximize their damage. As such, you want to make sure that you're paying attention not only to the base HP and MP that these pieces of gear are giving, but also the overall stats that they're providing for your character, especially if you're going for a particular build. This only gets more involved as you proceed through the game and you get even more creative pieces of gear unlocked for you, so make sure that you're checking everything for some interesting little bonus stats. And along with that, number 8, new gear, quote-unquote, is not necessarily better gear, quote-unquote. A great example of this is when you unlock the Wizard's Robe fairly early on in Chapter 2. This is a great item because it gives you +2 magic attack and a decent amount of MP for any mage that equips it, or even like a knight if you wanted to put it on them and have a weird like hybrid spell sword thing going on. This will, from a raw damage standpoint, be far better than a lot of the ladder robes that you will wind up unlocking, even if they have better baseline stats, because it just boosts your damage potential so much. As a result, I very often keep wizard robes on my wizards and my priests for a long time, until I finally get to the point where I have either so much of an HP and MP disparity that I need to upgrade, or I even get to the point where more robes with an equivalent magic attack boost are provided. It's not something that you always have to do, but it is oftentimes at least worth considering. So make sure that you're checking the balance when you're upgrading your gear. Number 9, JP spillover. Okay, we mentioned this briefly before, now it's time to get into it. There's a mechanic in the game where a portion of the JP that is gained by a character will be shared to every other party member, letting them slowly grow jobs that they don't have unlocked. Essentially what this means is, say you have a chemist in your party, and that chemist takes part in every battle, and they get a fair amount of use. That means that every other character that you have deployed, each fight will get a small amount of chemist JP. So over time, you can even buy them very powerful skills like, again, your potion, Phoenix Down, auto potion, high potion, X potion, ethers, elixirs, all that type of stuff, without necessarily even having to step foot into chemist. This is a really nice way of being able to flesh out characters' builds without necessarily screwing up their whole setup and switching jobs constantly. And it's something that you can focus if you really want to get a ton of JP from a particular job very, very quickly. You can make 2, 3, hell, even 4 characters that job, and whoever is not currently that job will get that bonus from everybody. Now, what's interesting about this mechanic, because it's something that has always existed, is it seems like it has been buffed from previous versions of the game to help you get more abilities faster, something that the dev team in the pre-release period stated that they wanted to fix. From my research and what I've been told by others as I've been looking into it, the JP spillover mechanic used to be a flat 20% gain. So if you gained, say, 10 JP taking an action, you would get 2 JP for everyone else. Now, according to the in-game tutorials, the spillover mechanic has been buffed to a quarter specifically. So that would be a 5% increase from where it was before. If that's correct, we of course need to do testing to see what the thresholds are, if it rounds up, rounds down. You know, if you got 10 JP for an action, does that mean that your ally characters get 3 JP now? Does it round up from 2 to 3 because you're at 25%, but obviously there's no like clear 25% without having a second digit to work with? Or is it just 2 until you get enough JP from actions that it can actually hit that 25% mark? No one really knows yet. A lot of testing is required for this, and we need to see if that description in the menus is even accurate. But I've been talking about how it feels like JP gains have been boosted across the board, and this spillover mechanic seems to be the culprit for that, and it is a very welcome culprit indeed. Number 10, and we touched on this in the previous point as well, to quickly grind up new jobs, have multiple characters train it simultaneously, as that JP spillover will stack. There'll be certain points in the game where you just hit a threshold, where you get a bunch of more quote-unquote advanced jobs unlocked, and you might want a bunch of those jobs on your team, or there might be a particular ability from one of those jobs that you want on everybody. One of the big ones back in the day was Teleport from Time Mage, which used to cost a measly like 600 JP. Now it's 3,000, so it might not be as automatic of a go-to, but if you really want to grind it out and get Teleport on your entire team, make your whole team Time Mages. Not only will they be gaining JP for their own actions, but every other Time Mage on the team will also be getting that JP boost, so you can really start to stack these abilities up very, very quickly. Number 11, check the in-game job descriptions for mechanical info. This is a nice new little feature to the Ivalice Chronicles in the party formation screen. You can actually see descriptions that give gameplay tips as well as mechanical insight for each of the different jobs. For example, in one of these menus is where you can see the information that chemists not only now have innate treasure finder, so you'll be able to just walk around and get random items with them, which is handy, but it also tells you that if you equip the normal treasure finder ability that you can learn on chemist onto a chemist, they'll actually have a higher chance of finding rare items, which is very, very cool. And there's a bunch of little tidbits like this, alongside just overall gaming info and gameplay ideas for each of the jobs. I highly recommend that you look at each of these every time you unlock a new job. You'll get some insight into what they can do. And honestly, I'll probably do a whole video talking about how each job functions with each of these little tidbits once I have all of them available to me. Very good insight here, extremely good addition to the game. Do not miss these menus. Number 12, don't let guests leech XP and JP. I know this falls a little bit into the combat scenario, could have included it in the previous video, but it has more of a bearing on your overall army growth, so we're going to talk about it here. Whenever you have guest characters in combat, anything that they do that is reducing enemy HP or taking enemies off the board is potentially them taking XP and JP from you that you would have otherwise earned. It's not the biggest deal sometimes, but there are some guest characters like, say, Delita in Chapter 1 that you have for a long time, and over the course of multiple battles, especially if you're not trying to do too much grinding, you can actually miss out on some levels in JP due to these guests' actions. Now, this wouldn't be as much of an issue, however, many guests you have for a little while and then they just leave and they never join your party again. So it's not like you're being able to build them up. And even characters that are starting as guests and then do join you later as actual playable characters don't keep what they gained from when they were in the party as guests. So either way, you're missing out, and all of those points just poof into the ether once that guest is gone as a guest, regardless of if they join you later. Number 13, when building an army, don't discount monsters. Monsters have always been a potentially interesting choice in Final Fantasy Tactics, niche but viable, but a bunch have actually gotten buffs in the Ivalice Chronicles, such as the bomb, which we talked about in the previous video. Now, bombs can use their self-destruct ability to deal a massive amount of damage and apply oil to everything around them without actually getting downed, meaning that you can potentially heal them, do it again, just have them do basic attacks, be a blocker, whatever it is that you might need them to do. And there's a lot of different interesting utility options with monsters in this game as a result. I acknowledge you can't build them, quote-unquote, so it's not as interesting as using another human character, but they do have some unique traits to them that can empower your other human characters. Think of them more as like a utility piece, or almost like a mobile piece of equipment that you use to enable a build with the rest of your party. I do highly recommend getting a mediator, having them learn beast talk, and then recruiting some of the more interesting monsters, again, like bombs, and seeing how they can help to complement your overall party. And finally, when leveling, keep in mind the job that you currently have equipped, as it will dictate what stat growths you get. This is always an interesting discussion because there are a lot of people who feel like it's really not important enough to really bring up, but I do think it bears mentioning because it is a mechanic that exists, and for people who either want to make sure that they're min-maxing or just like to keep this type of thing in mind, it is worth discussing. Like classes in something like Fire Emblem, every job has growth rates associated with it that will increase your stats when you level up in your normal levels. Again, keep in mind you have your normal job levels, and then you have your character XP, which is like your typical RPG leveling system. And Monk versus Chemist have very different growth rates. We're not going to go through them all here, but as a kind of easy rule of thumb, you have three major categories that classes and jobs will fall into: warriors, rogues, and mages. Warriors are things like monks or knights that are typically going to get good amount of HP, physical attack, etc. Rogues are more likely to have high accuracy, evasion, and speed. These would be like your thieves, your archers, your ninjas. And then mages, of course, are mages. Some will get more or less magical attack, like a black mage will get more magic attack than a white mage, but overall they're going to focus on magical stats, MP, that type of fun thing. So if you have a particular build for a character in mind, like you know that this one character is always going to be using physical attack jobs, you want to minimize the time that they spend in one of the other categories to make sure you can really lean into what their strengths are going to be. If you want to have a really badass dual-wield punch monk at the end of the game, you don't want that character to spend 40 levels in Chemist. As a very quick and easy example, figure out some general intended roles for each character at the beginning of the game, lean into that role as you progress, and you'll find yourself in a pretty healthy spot by the end of the game. And that, my friends, is 14 tips for character building and army construction in Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles. As with the combat video, there is obviously a ton more that we could talk about here, but I feel like this is a good overall generalist view to help people get back into the game or learn the game for the first time if you are new to it, because I know we have a lot of new players in the community right now. And knowing how to properly actually kit out your characters in your army and to most efficiently do that as you progress through the game is one of the biggest aspects of Final Fantasy Tactics. So hopefully this helps you get into it a little bit more easily. I asked you all recently to let me know what topics and guides you would like to see from me about Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles, and more than any other, the biggest request I've had is an explanation of the Brave and Faith system. So, That's what we're going to be talking about today. So what is Brave and Faith? This is something that we've been talking about plenty during my live streams, and it's also something I've mentioned in a few of my previous videos, including our 14 tips to army building video that I just put out yesterday at time of recording. However, it is a fair thing to want to know more about it, as it is a pretty integral system that, while well explained now in the game, and I'll have a bunch of the actual in-game tutorial screenshots from the Chronicle so you can actually reference exactly what the game has to tell you, it's not something that's brought up very directly in normal moment-to-moment gameplay. Alongside that, there's some nuances to this system in terms of how you can manipulate these scores and what you may or may not want on any individual given character, so we're going to talk about all of those things today. What the system does, how to manage it, what you want to maximize the effectiveness of your army, etc. As always, if there's a particular section that you're looking most for, you'll find a full list of all the different timestamps in the description as well as in the play bar, so you can jump around to wherever it is that you need to go. So starting off, what is Bravery and Faith? Bravery and Faith are two stats that every single character, including monsters, in the game have, and for every single character, they tend to be different. In random battles, enemies will have these stats randomized, as will the different recruits that you can get at the beginning of the game and from the Warriors Guild. Unique characters such as Ramza and Ivalice, as well as characters that are in set story battles, will have their own set Brave and Faith scores. And if you're just breezing through the game, kind of doing your thing, not really paying attention, you wouldn't ever really think about what it is that these scores do. Like, yeah, you might see it on a unit status screen when you're going to do an attack or something and see, oh, this guy's got 70 Brave and 45 Faith. But like, what does that mean? How is that affecting the damage numbers? Does it affect the damage numbers at all? And the answer is yes. Yes, it does. For Brave, the higher your Brave is, the more damage you're going to deal with certain types of attacks, and the more likely certain reaction abilities will be to trigger. For your attacks, you're looking at barehanded attacks, whether just on its own or with the Brawler skill for monks or just on monks themselves, as well as katanas and knight swords. These are the three weapon types or attack types that you want to have maximal Brave for to deal the most damage with. For reaction abilities, things like counter, auto potion, Shirahadori, etc. all scale off of your bravery, so if you have extremely high Brave, you're going to trigger those reactions very, very often, which is obviously most of the time to your benefit. This means that for certain types of physical attackers, and for anyone who has a reaction skill that you want to have activate when they take an attack, you want to have the maximum possible Brave. Brave is a stat where you pretty much never, with one exception case, want to have low Brave. The higher it is for you, the better it will be, and there's really no downsides to it. This is part of the reason that monks are such a powerful class, because Brave scaling is so strong for them, as well as anything that you put the Brawler skill on from monk to make them also be able to fight effectively with bare hands. If you're looking at low Brave, there's two things to keep in mind. First of all, if you're having a dedicated treasure hunter, like the treasure hunter skill that you can get from chemists, and which is innate to chemists, the lower your Brave score is, the higher chance that you'll find rare items when you're walking around on the battlefield and step on a spot where an item can be found. This is niche, but very, very handy, especially for a very late game, kind of almost post-game content dungeon. So you might think to yourself, okay, well, this seems like a pretty clear delta then, right? I want maximized Brave on everyone that is going to be doing any sort of combat, and I want minimized Brave on a dedicated treasure hunter, right? Yes for the first part, no for the second part. There's functionally no reason not to get your Brave maxed on all of your combat characters, but reduced Brave can actually lead to a character leaving the party permanently. Once you've gotten your Brave down to like the single digits, you will actually have a character start threatening to leave the party, and if it gets even lower than that, like actually minimized, they will just abandon you out of pure cowardice and fear. Obviously, this is not something that you want to have happen, because you don't want to just randomly be having characters leave your party, so if you are making a dedicated treasure hunter, you want to bring it down to like 15 Brave, and that'll put you in a good spot, especially if they're a chemist with treasure hunter equipped. With Faith, you're kind of looking at the opposite scenario. Faith dictates everything to do with magic and magical effects, so ideally you want to have very high faith on your mages, and good faith on anyone that you are targeting with your mages. With high faith, you both deal and take more damage from magic, and when you cast effects like, say, haste from Time Mage, for example, the higher your faith, the more likely it is that you'll actually get the effect to land, in conjunction with the higher the target's faith is, the more likely it will be to land. It is a two-stat system. However, you can probably imagine how this can become a problem, as like, yeah, say you want to have really high faith on your frontline knight, so that it's really easy to land buffs on them, right? Okay, sure, absolutely correct. However, that also means that the black mages on the enemy team are licking their chops. They are salivating, waiting to land a tasty Firaga on that knight and watch him turn to dust instantly. You do not want to have that happen, so it becomes a balancing act with how much faith you actually want on your characters. To compound this, unlike bravery, where once you hit too low brave, your character will leave, with faith, once you hit too high faith, your character will leave. Not because they've become a coward and they're too craven to stand on the battlefield, but because they've become a follower of God and they would rather go and follow a holy mission or a pilgrimage than fight with you in your army, and they will abandon you as a result on similar thresholds as to cowards leaving due to low bravery. As a result, you really don't want to leave like the high 80s with faith on any given character, because as soon as you break like 90 faith, you're going to have them threatening to leave constantly, and once you get much higher than that for any reason, they'll be out at the end of the next fight. Conversely, with low faith, you can almost entirely mitigate magical effects on characters that you never want to be targeted by. Once you start getting down to something like in the 30s with faith, magic damage will be almost non-existent on you, and it'll be extremely hard to be targeted by both positive and negative effects. Haste won't land, poison will miss completely, you'll have a character that is essentially anathema, they're like a blank from Warhammer 40k, and this filthy magic just won't touch them. Fortunately, there is no downside to having absolutely no faith whatsoever, so if you really wanted to, you can make an army that completely shuns the idea of magic altogether and has 3 faith across the board, and you just never have to worry about it, relying on things like chakra from monk for healing or items to res people, provide healing, etc. It'll just be a little bit more difficult to get buffs. You'll be limited to things like samurai, but you can still do it that way. So that's what Brave and Faith do, but you've probably been noticing I've been saying like, oh, well, if you increase your brave score or reduce your faith score or whatever, and be wondering, how the heck do I do that? And that's where I have to introduce you to our friend, the Mediator. Mediator is a very interesting job. It has some in-combat capabilities, like being able to put characters to sleep, they can wield guns, it's nice. What they mainly do is more of a meta progression type of skill set. The primary roles for Mediator are recruiting enemy units and monsters, which obviously is extremely powerful, and then manipulating Brave and Faith. They have 4 skills, 2 for Brave and 2 for Faith, which will allow you to increase or decrease the score over the course of a battle. Each of these skills will increase or decrease the related skill by 4, meaning that you can actually max out or completely minimize a character's stat in either category over the course of a fight, although it'll take a while, and make them absolute monsters or completely useless, depending on what you're targeting and what type of job the enemy or ally is in. Of course, if that was the only thing at play here, it would be a very roundabout way to maximize or minimize stats, only to then have to do it all over again at the start of another fight, right? Well, fortunately, manipulating Brave and Faith in this way does actually permanently increase and decrease your stats as well. You see, for every 4 points that you get, or every 4 points that you lose in Brave and Faith, you will permanently gain or lose 1 point in Brave or Faith. This means over the course of multiple battles, you can slowly manipulate your character's stats to be where you want them to be to really min-max your entire party. You do need to note that you actually have to be able to gain or lose the stats in the first place, so once you have a character at 100 Brave in a battle, you can't continue to praise them to get more stacking Brave on top of that, because they're not actually getting the point increase. They're maxed, they're capped, they can't go any further. So you do need to do this over the course of multiple battles. It will take a little while, but you can effectively min-max all of your characters doing this. It is slightly annoying as the Mediator does not have the greatest hit chance with these skills, especially if they don't have good Zodiac compatibility with whoever it is that you're looking at, but time heals all wounds and fixes all stats. You do also have another option, and this is partially my preferred option, at least to manipulate Brave, which is Ramza himself. In Chapter 2, his Squire job gets the skill Steel, S-T-E-E-L, like the metal, which you can use on a target to increase their Brave by 5 for the map. You can keep doing this, you can keep spamming it. You do only get 1 permanent point of Brave, because you're only getting like 5 points in that one use, and it doesn't stack cumulatively over multiple uses. But even so, you can do this. It's another way to increase your bravery, and unlike the Mediator, Steel has a 100% chance to hit. So you can spend a bunch of time with Ramza as essentially a cheerleader for the rest of the army until they're all hugely buff and swollen on their own confidence, which is very fun. Unfortunately, if you are looking to manipulate Faith, Mediator is still the way that you need to go. To demonstrate this, we have a random battle here where we have an Orator and 2 monks. We'll be using praise on each of these fine gentlemen once only to get them from their 80 base Brave to 81. You can see here And then also following here, where they each get hit by praise, they increase their brave by 4 for the battle. And then after the battle here, you can see now in my unit formation screen, they both have 81 brave. And the exact same procedure would be followed for faith and for reducing both stats. So we've talked about what Brave and Faith do, as well as how to manipulate those scores, but what are some actual use cases, some examples of when and where you would want to put the time in to manipulate these scores? And this is where things get a little tricky, because it really depends on what type of overall team comp you're going for. For Brave, almost universally, you want as much on everybody as you can get. So that's a pretty easy one. Just spend a bunch of time with a Mediator and Ramza over the course of a campaign, boosting everyone's Brave up until they all have 97, which is as high as you can go, because you can't then get 4 points to get another point, because you'll go from 97 to 100. It's not 4 points. You don't get the permanent point. Makes sense. But you do want to maximize that if possible. Your priority targets should be things like your monks, because again, their innate brawler skill makes their punches scale with brave, and it also affects their martial arts capabilities, so all of those are going to be stronger. If you have a knight or holy knight or someone else who's wielding knight swords, then you are going to want to be able to have their brave maxed out so that they're dealing maximum damage, and anything wielding a katana, most likely just samurai, will also want to have maximized brave, so that even while they're throwing around their magical Iaido skills, they can still cut something in half with a sword. After that, any frontliners that are going to be relying on reaction abilities to deal more damage or have more survivability are what you're going to want to target, and then after that you can just fill out the rest of the roster. It's not as important that your black mage be a courageous hero across the ages, but if you don't have anyone else to boost up, I mean, you may as well, right? Faith is where things get a lot more complicated. Your mages, of course, you pretty much want to have as high faith as you can get, even though it'll make them more vulnerable to magic. They're going to be in the back line. They're not going to be getting targeted as much if you're positioning your troops correctly. And it's going to mean that their damage output, their healing, and their buff capability are going to be significantly better. Ideally, you're going to want to have mages with upper 80s faith by like the end of chapter 2 if you can really make it happen. And if you are able to make that happen, they're going to be extremely deadly for you. For your frontline fighters, you have 2 more distinct options that you can go with. If you want, you can have an extremely heavy God-fearing force with everyone on your team having a ton of faith to make it so much easier to be able to put magical healing and buffs on the squad. Having an entire army of essentially paladins who at the start of a fight can receive haste, protect, shell, and a bunch of other beneficial effects from a few very easy and quick casts will make for a very potent fighting force, especially for the first few turns of combat. And with things like shell to help mitigate enemy magic damage, it won't be as dangerous as it could be, although you are still going to have to look out for debuffs. On the flip side, you can also make a force of frontline atheists who have essentially no faith whatsoever, minimizing it to 3, who will then literally laugh or just blink in confusion when mages say hamana, 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 and then nothing happens on them. They just kind of look around like, all right, well, I'm going to poke you with this sword now, so, bye. It is very effective if you're going to be dealing with enemy mages. However, you then have the issue of magical healing is going to be completely useless, and you will not be able to buff them with any sort of normal spells. So if you don't have a chemist or some other very specialized support unit on hand, if they get beat up in melee or gored by some horrifying monster, it might be a little bit harder to actually, patch them up. So that is a downside. Either way, there's pros and cons to both playstyles, but you kind of have to choose early on what it is that you're going to go for before you start manipulating these stats, if you choose to do so. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to do these things, especially if you're not on Tactician. You can probably get away with just having a smart distribution of stats on the characters that you recruit, and you'll be okay for the majority of the game. If you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, though, this is where you want to start looking at what recruits are available in the actual Warriors Guild. Are you able to find a character that has like 70 Brave and 45 Faith to start going down that road of an atheistic melee fighter? Or are you able to find a character that's got 70-70 in both stats like Ramza does at the start of the game? Someone who can go into either a sword and board wielding role with backline support magic or become a mage themselves, or just do a Spellblade type of build. That's an option as well. This is a great baseline to look at, as well as seeing what enemies you can try and entice from random battles and story missions with your mediator that you're now going to have to manipulate these stats to make your life a little bit easier and not require quite so much grinding. So definitely keep an eye on what stats recruits and potential enemy recruits have on offer for you as well. Finally, I figured I'd toss this in here as well because it is kind of part of the discussion, even though it's not a manipulation of the stats themselves. There are certain spells from the Oracle job, as well as a special unique character that I won't get into now for spoilers, who are actually able to put a temporary stat buff on your characters for Brave and for Faith. It doesn't actually affect their score in any way, but it essentially treats it like those stats have been maxed out. So if you don't feel like going through this whole stat manipulation thing, you can dedicate a support character to casting these effects on your team to make them temporarily more powerful. It'll run out just like any other buff. If they get down, they'll lose it, and it will be something you have to do every fight, but it is an option if you want to go down that route rather than the stat grinding route. And that, my friends, is the comprehensive discussion of Brave and Faith. I don't think I missed anything here. This has always been my understanding of the system. I've practiced with it a lot over the years, but if there is a nuance that you'd like to discuss or something that I did miss, please do bring it up in the comments. If it's something major, I'll make a pinned comment with that information in it, or even do a revised video, of course. Depends on what, if anything, I might have not talked about, but I think we're good. And let me know if this is in any way helpful for you. Kind of like the Zodiacs, which is a whole nother video that we'll get into. We're not talking about that right now. This is one of those systems that makes Final Fantasy Tactics feel really unique and interesting, but can also be pretty esoteric because of its uniqueness. So, seeing as how so many people were asking me so many questions about all the different aspects of it, I figured it warranted a video. Are you fed up with the same old, tired, dual-wield punch recommendations for Ramza in Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles? Do you want to try something new and make him actually feel like a unique character, like so many people want him to be? Well, I have good news for you. That's what this build is here for, because it's my personal favorite one for him. So what are we doing here today? Well, I've had a lot of requests for a Ramza build, specifically my Ramza build as a Geomancer Samurai, or Samurai Geomancer, depending on which way you want to flavor it. I particularly start with Samurai. I've talked about it before on stream, explained why I like it so much, and I do think it has a lot of merits to it, even if it's not the objectively strongest build, do 999 damage twice with dual-wield monk punch type of build. I think it's more fun than that. It's also a lot faster to get online, which is fun. So we're going to talk about why I like the build so much, what its functionality is supposed to be, and then show off what the build looks like at the early stages of Chapter 3, where I am currently at in my campaign, with a little bit of an example battle. There's a lot to go over here, so let's begin, shall we? Ramza is a very interesting character to build because he's an extremely strong all-rounder. He's got good starting Brave, he's got good starting Faith, he's got good starting stats and continues to have good stats because of his Squire class, having higher growth rates than other classes. He's just a very strong all-rounder that you can do pretty much whatever you want with, and he stays that way for the entire game. There's no one right way to build him, and it's because of those capabilities that I like to turn him into a bit of a spell sword. I'm a sucker for someone who can wield a sword and a shield, but then also throw magical effects around. Someone who can have a lot of utility that they bring to the battlefield while also being able to slay out in melee combat. And this build does exactly that. We start off in Geomancer and pretty much want to learn all of the Geomancy available. If you're going to use Geomancy at all, you want every single one of these abilities, and I imagine that's why they're priced pretty cheaply. $150 for each, you stack them all up as quick as you can, and then no matter what terrain that you're standing on, you're going to be able to deal okay magic damage at range and apply some status effects. People always really underestimate Geomancer, to be perfectly honest. Like, yeah, it's not the most damaging magical effect out there, but it is good chip damage at a very long range with an instant cast and no MP requirement, and then you can actually stack some beneficial status effects on top with surprising regularity, especially because all these abilities hit in an AoE. I also like that Geomancer gives you attack boost, which can be very nice on this build. It's not something that I typically use. I actually use another ability that we'll go over once I actually show Ramza's build here, but it is absolutely an option that I have used on the build in the past. For this setup in particular, I like to use Geomancy as an opening gambit, essentially while we're moving in on the enemy and no one's in quite close enough range for melee combat or the Samurai's abilities. Then you can start picking them off with Geomancy, maybe apply some status effects, and start moving the battle in a favorable direction for you, while really nothing else can affect you, and potentially the rest of your team can't affect anything either. It also synergizes very well with the stats that you want for Samurai, which, seeing as how that's pretty much the primary job that we're going to be building into, is a nice bonus. If you wanted to do something else instead of Geomancy, you do have options like Black Magic, White Magic, etc., because we are going to have a major focus on magic attack with this setup. Moving on from Geomancer, and once you've gotten the appropriate job levels, we can turn into a Samurai. And Samurai is a very interesting class that I think goes very underappreciated compared to some of the other late game jobs. The functionality of Samurai is very interesting. Not only is it a heavy melee class using big heavy katanas that scale off of your brave as much as your physical attack, but it focuses almost entirely on being able to deal magical damage and doing magical support effects using katana. Essentially how it works is each time you learn one of the skills, you will have to have an associated katana in your inventory. It does not need to be equipped, just in your inventory, and then when you use that ability, there's a small chance that that katana will break. So it is a class that wants you to have a pretty decent stock of swords in the armory to be able to draw these spirits out of to trigger these magical effects. That said, the power of these effects cannot be denied. It starts with very basic AoE damage, and when I say AoE, I mean every square that is 2 spaces away from Ramza, which actually gives you a pretty big area of effect. And granted, this is for any character that's in Samurai, not just Ramza, but for the sake of this build, it's Ramza. Scaling all the way up to mass AoE heals, application of Protect and Shell, even heavier magic damage, applying slows, or occasionally, a big damage in a straight line, which can be good for catching a bunch of characters who've lined up and are unawares. It's a very versatile set of abilities, and with the right equipment and stat setup, can be way more effective at a myriad of support jobs than certain other jobs could be, all packed into one character, which gives you a ton of battlefield versatility, and it's nice to have some support roles on Ramza, because that is kind of how his whole shtick works. He's not a fancy Holy Knight, he's not a fancy Fell Knight, he's just a good-hearted dude who's drawn a lot of people to his cause through sheer charisma and morals, and having a job that can kind of follow that logic is really fun. As far as the gear that Samurai brings to the table, this is very key, as it uses all of the same sort of heavy armor and robe options that Knight uses, while then also wielding katanas, which again function like Knight swords in that they scale off of both physical attack and brave. And you naturally are going to have high brave on Ramza, because at some point, if you're not using his steel ability on himself to strengthen his soul, then you're going to be screaming from the top of your lungs like Goku when you hit chapter 4 and get shout, just because you want the physical attack and speed buffs, and then also you will naturally end with maxed out brave. So it's a great weapon class to have on Ramza that synergizes well with his other class abilities. Once you have this build fully online, you have an incredibly capable main character, seeing as how you have to have him in every main story battle, and you'll be able to rely on the fact that you always have Protect and Shell on hand that can hit your entire party at the start of the map, barring certain deployments. You have the ability to heal your entire party with a massive amount of healing in an AoE instantly. There's no charge time on any of these. You have huge AoE magic that cannot be evaded and is non-elemental, so you're able to deal damage to everything and anything extremely consistently. And you're also wielding heavy armor and can do damage in melee. It is the guaranteed all-rounder job setup, which I think very well suits the guaranteed all-rounder character that Ramza is. Plus, it kind of gives you that cool idea that he does have a nice, unique job of his own to stand alongside Fell Knights, Holy Knights, and the like. As far as the build itself is concerned, this is what I am currently set up with. We are just outside Orvon Monastery before we're about to go and do that series of battles, so that is the level of gear that I currently have available to me. This is very much an in-progress setup. There are only so many katanas that I can get, meaning there's only so many abilities that I can use. That is one limitation of the build as you are progressing it. However, if you're making regular story progress and not just grinding constantly forever, you will have everything that you need at this point in the game. As far as our equipment is concerned, we have the following: the Ame no Murakumo, because it's just the physically strongest katana that you can wield. There's really no difference in any of these early katanas at all, beyond just one of them has better physical attack. Like, you can go through, you've got the Ashura, you've got the Kotetsu, the Bizen Osafune, the Murasame. The Ame no Murakumo is going to be the one that has the best physical attack. They all have the same parry chance. They don't have any bonus effects. So you just want to equip the one that has the highest physical attack power for where you're at in the game. Now, I also have an ice shield, which requires us to have equip shields. We'll talk about that in a moment. A close helmet, a wizard's robe, and a mage power gloves. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, I thought this was supposed to be a heavy armor job. Why are you using robes? Well, again, as mentioned, we have an entire ability set that scales off of your magical attack. So, being able to equip robes that do boost your magic is actually a very powerful option for the samurai job, and it's part of the reason that I want to be in the samurai job when doing this setup. At this point in the game, the wizard's robe is the only robe that you can get that increases your magical attack power, unless you're able to like get lucky and steal a more powerful robe from a random enemy that has a higher tier item, but the wizard's robe is very good for that. It doesn't have great HP or MP, but we do get that magic attack boost, which does mean that we're going to be doing a lot more with our various different Iaido abilities. This is equivalent to a 20% boost in power because it goes from 8 magic power to 10 magic power due to this rope. We also have the Mage Power Gloves for the same reason, also gives +2 magic attack power. Because we have movement +1, and we'll go over our abilities in a second, we don't need boots. You could make an argument for things like the red shoes that give you more movement, but you have 1 less magic attack. You could also make the argument for the Diamond Bracer because it would give you more physical attack. You'd still get magic attack. You would also be immune to slow. It depends on how much you're expecting on actually doing melee combat with this job. But I like the Mage Power Gloves because personally, I love to spam Iaido abilities. We have the Close Helmet because it's just the highest HP helmet that you can have at this point in the game, and we definitely need HP. And then again, we have the Ice Shield. Now, the Ice Shield is an interesting choice, and part of the reason that I have equipped shields at all is because I want to have a little bit of an increase in defense since we have less HP than you might expect for a heavy armor job at this point in the game. It's the Ice Shield specifically because our primary Black Mage, Kelvin here, is primarily using the Blizzard series of spells. So, with this shield on Ramza, we actually have the ability to get a bunch of free healing if needed because we can absorb ice. It also means that we have fire damage, which is phenomenal with the number of bombs that are in random battles. We are weak to lightning, but lightning is not something that you really encounter that often, especially in random battles, so it's a pretty decent trade-off overall. Later on in the game, we will still be using equip shields because I want to get an Aegis shield on Ramza, which is one of the best shields that you can get and also gives you magic attack. So again, even more damage and even more healing for our Iaido abilities. Speaking of which, let's talk about our abilities here. We, of course, do have Iaido. The Samurai Job command releases the spirit in a katana to attack enemies and aid allies. This will sometimes break the katana. Now, right now, we have Ashura, Kotetsu, Bizen Osafune, Murasame, and Ame no Murakumo. Ashura and Kotetsu are generally not going to get used at this point in the game, as we want to be using Ame no Murakumo as a damage option. This is going to be the strongest attack that we have in terms of raw damage, and also has the chance to inflict slow, which is very, very nice. If we're just trying to like whittle enemies down, let other characters get kills, Ashura and Kotetsu do still have their uses, of course, but if we're going whole hog and really being serious about it, Ame no Murakumo is what we're going to be using. We also have Bizen Osafune, allowing us to drain MP from surrounding foes, which especially on Tactician is extremely important because enemy mages are vicious, and because of like the way damage mitigation has been changed and everything, you're not guaranteed to be able to just outright kill them if they're charging something, so being able to steal their MP instead is nice. And then Murasame, invoke the Rain of Wisdom, the spirit of the Murasame, raining tears of an enlightened soul to restore HP to oneself and surrounding allies. This is an extremely potent heal. I have footage here that I'll have either earlier in the video or now or whatever, where you can see I'm getting big like 120 heals when I have mainly characters with no more than like 180 health in a huge AoE that can fit the entire party. This is an extremely potent healing ability that cannot be underestimated, and it scales well into the future because of the way that magic attack scaling works with Samurai, because you can get so much gear that boosts magic attack. I love this option. I use it a ton. Later on, once we get better katanas, we'll be able to get things like Kiyomori, which is what gives us Protect and Shell, as well as Masamune that gives regen and haste to the user and surrounding allies, which is insane. And then, of course, even more damage options that have various bonus effects and targeting and the like. Going along with that, we do have Geomancy, and I do have Geomancy entirely mastered on Ramza at this point, with all the various different effects that you can have for every single different type of tile in the game. This is, again, more of just a support option. It depends on what battlefield you're on, for what status effects you're going to be able to inflict, what element of damage you're going to be dealing, but it's just nice to be able to target something at such long range. 5 range is very, very strong in this game, especially given the fact that you can hit in a plus-shaped formation, so it's a good way to just start chipping down at enemies. In the battle that I'm going to be showing off, you'll see that I'm not actually able to target the bombs that are in the enemy front line because we were using Tremor and they're floating, so you're not going to hit them with ground effects, but most of the time, it's going to be very reasonable for you to be able to do a decent chunk of damage to the enemy before they're even in melee range. We then have Shirahidori. Shirahidori is still, to this day, one of the single most broken reaction abilities in Final Fantasy Tactics. When receiving physical attack, the unit's parry rate is the same as its bravery value. This means right now, I have the ability to essentially avoid 75% of attacks that come my way. Not magic, but attacks, and that's going to make Ramza extremely durable, especially alongside his shield. It's going to be very, very easy for him to avoid most melee attacks and even some ranged attacks because of this setup. And that means that it's far safer for us to be using robes over plate armor to get that HP bonus. We then do have equipped shields to be able to use shields. There are plenty of other options you could go with. As I talked about earlier, again, attack boost from Geomancer is great. There's a lot of other potential choices as well, but for this setup currently we do have equipped shields, and then we have movement +1. We do want a movement ability here, seeing as how we're not currently using any boots, and you do want to be able to get into melee fairly quickly to be able to use your AoE Eido skills. If I have the time and the ability to grind it up, we will eventually want to get like move +2, maybe even teleport from different jobs, but right now at this point in the game, move +1 is fine. And that's pretty much the build as far as Chapter 3 in the early game is concerned. There is a lot of different gear that you'll be able to get and start putting towards Samurai as you move through Chapter 3 and definitely in Chapter 4, but this is a pretty strong setup for where we're at in the game currently. As far as an example battle is concerned, we have this one here in the Zeklaus Desert. Now, as I mentioned in the previous segment, you're not going to be able to see the effects of Geomancy really at all, because usually the targets that you're going to be using Geomancy on will be the targets that are in the front line of the enemy formation if they have a more standard first line, second line type of formation going on. Here, because we're on sand, we're using Tremor. Tremor doesn't affect bombs because bombs are floating and that avoids ground type damage, but it does give us the opportunity to hang back instead and use some buffs. And later in the game, once we get access to the ability that allows us to apply Protect, Shell, Haste, Regen, etc. to our entire team, we may very well choose to do that anyway at the beginning of a fight like this. As far as the rest of the fight is concerned, I mean, the evidence is right in front of your eyes, right? As soon as we get in melee range, we can start popping AoE magic damage. If the team takes any major damage from things like, oh, I don't know, a bomb self-destructing, we can immediately pop a massive amount of healing to get everyone back on their feet. It's very, very versatile. We never really have to worry about any sort of physical damage. What magical damage we take, we can then easily heal up either by using our own healing or being targeted by ice magic or whatever flavor of magic you choose. If you have a different shield you choose to equip or a different robe or whatever, you have options there. It's very strong, despite the fact that it doesn't have quite as much tankiness in raw stats the way something like Knight would. And again, this is a very basic example. The abilities and strength of Samurai scales so much as you make progress through the game because you get such better equipment and because you're actually able to use abilities that you don't have access to earlier in the game because of the whole, like, you need to be able to buy the different katanas that you can get unless you're grinding in a specific way and can steal them from enemies and yada yada yada. Like, Samurai scales all the way through the end game and only gets stronger the further that you go. And that's one of the things that I love the most about it. With this setup, I can drop Ramza into any fight, random battle or story fight that he needs to come along on, and know that he is going to be doing not just something, but a lot to keep the team going. And because the setup is so versatile, it means that I have a lot more flexibility with what I can do with the rest of the team. I don't necessarily need someone with white magic to put Protect and Shell on. And hell, he can do it to everyone with one ability, rather than having to wait for the charge time and use the MP to cast 2 different spells. Ramza can keep the entire team alive and let them keep attacking and doing damage rather than spending their turns healing. And when you have so many strong characters that join later on, you do really appreciate some guaranteed support in that capacity. And then if there's a big clump of enemies and you need to be able to deal some damage, boy howdy, Ramza's going to deal some damage. He might deal more damage than like the Holy Knights and things like that. He can really slap as well. Even if you're having range or height issues, Geomancy can deal with that. It's got some of the best range in the game. It's got no restrictions based on height. And there's always times where you're going to just get a random stop or petrify or something else on an enemy that completely cripples them. Disable is another one. And you're just like, all right, well, cool. That's just free cherry on top. This just got even easier for us. It's a build that has a lot of spice to it. It has a lot of play to it. And while it might not be the top dog for raw single target damage, I like that it adds so much capability for team building for the rest of your party while still being so capable as a result. Because Ramza is a hero. He should be on the front lines. He should be getting his hands dirty. He should be really butting heads with the enemy. He's not just going to be in the back line being an orator, although that would also be a fun build for him. And with this, even though he does not get a very special, unique class of his own, he still is able to feel like it. And I really enjoy that from a sort of lore perspective. And there you go. That's my Spell Sword Ramza build. I love playing Ramza this way. I have played this game 24 times or more at this point over the course of my life, and of all the different builds that I have done on Ramza, this is always the one that I default back to. I just enjoy it so much. There's so many different ways that you can do it. Like if you don't even want to mess with geomancy, metal works well here, especially once you're able to get a certain spell late in the game, because you have all this magic attack for samurai. That also works really well, and then you can do all of the self-buffing stuff. Like samurai likes everything that you get from shout. It wants the speed, it wants the physical attack, it wants the magical attack, it wants the brave. It feels like Samurai was a job that was made specifically for Ramza, and then they just gave it to everybody else as well. And I absolutely love that about it. If you try this build, or you've done variations of it yourself that you think warrant some discussion because you had a different piece of gear or a different secondary job or whatever that played really well, do please tell people about it in the comments. I would love to see more people doing fun stuff like this. Or if you have your own particular build for Ramza with some other completely random out there set of jobs that works extremely well, let us know that as well, because there is so much you can do with this character. I've had many requests to get a bit more granular on what abilities, builds, jobs, etc. I would recommend for new and returning players for Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles. So today, I figured we would start off a series of videos talking about just that by going over reaction abilities, as oftentimes they are extremely powerful, but also expensive and difficult to get to due to the jobs that they're in. You're going to have 6 good options to pick from here, and they all have their own merits. This is just one of many topics that I've seen lots of requests for. We'll be working through them all as quickly as I can. Thank you everyone who's been posting very regularly in the comments about what you would like to see. Hopefully very soon we'll be doing big coverage of the Zodiac signs mechanic as one example of future content. For now though, we have to talk reaction abilities, and that's exactly what we're going to get into. There's 6 that we want to go over here that I would say are the best, most universally applicable and useful abilities, and I'll give examples of why that is for each of them. I'll do my best to sprinkle in some gameplay examples of them where I can, though the nature of reaction abilities means that they just kind of trigger really quickly, and that's that. It's more important to discuss what they do and why they are valuable than to necessarily show you them in action. For this demonstration, we have 6 of our finest from the army lined up here, starting off with Sasha. Sasha has the Mana Shield ability, and that is the first that we will be talking about. Note that Mana Shield does not come from Black Mage. It does come, in fact, from Time Mage, but she is a Black Mage currently, so what are you going to do? Mana Shield, or Mana Shield, depending on your flavor, is a very powerful ability that just says, when receiving damage, MP is reduced rather than HP. That's it. It's extremely effective. It activates when you lose 1 or more HP. Doesn't matter from what, doesn't matter why. You just take damage on your MP before you take it on your HP. Now, of course, you might be thinking to yourself right off the bat, you really want that on your mages, though? Because, like, kind of need their MP to cast. But there's a few different reasons why this is so very powerful. First of all, mana, very easy to replenish in a lot more ways than you would expect. Things like Mana Font, where you just gain mana whenever you move around. Things like Chakra from the Monk, that can just generate mana for anyone around them, including themselves. The ability to use ethers. There's other spells and abilities that allow you to gain mana on cast or when being targeted or all sorts of different fun things. It's not as hard to replenish as you might expect. And the beautiful thing about the way Mana Shield works is if you have even 1 point left, the whole attack will go into your mana. There won't be any overflow to your HP. So even just the tiniest amount of recovery is essentially a get out of jail free card for at least 1 attack. As far as what types of jobs you want to have it on, there's not necessarily anything wrong with having it on your mages. If you expect that they might take a big hit and maybe won't be able to cast a huge spell, then you can work around it before you replenish their MP. But really the best use case for anyone with Mana Shield is either a physical fighter that does not use their mana at all, or a mage that doesn't require mana. For example, samurais, geomancers, great examples of characters that don't use MP as a resource and can just spam their abilities to no end. On the flip side of things, knights, unless you have a weird spellblade thing going on, knights are never going to use their mana for anything. They're just going to walk up, hit things with a sword, try to rend stats, rend armor, and having an even bigger HP pool by applying it damage directly to their MP first makes them extremely potent. This is just a phenomenal defensive option. Being able to get even more mana from equipping certain types of gear makes it even more powerful. It just turns your mana bar into a second health bar, which is so valuable on so many characters, especially on Tactician where things hit so damn hard. If you don't have any other idea of what you might want to do with a character and you know that you're going to have ways to replenish MP fairly easily on your team, you can absolutely do worse than slapping Mana Shield on as many of your fighters as you can. Moving on from Mana Shield, we have another phenomenal defensive option demonstrated by Ramza here, Shira Hidori. Shira Hidori does in fact come from the Samurai job, and it is quite possibly the single most broken reaction ability in the game, so long as you're dealing with the circumstances that it's built for. Shira Hidori says, when receiving a physical attack, the unit's parry rate is the same as its bravery rate. So basically, what that means is if you're getting attacked by a physical attack, and you have, for example, Ramza has 75 brave, you have a 75% chance to just avoid that attack, which then you can also get other bonuses like having shields to make that even higher before you are able to max out your brave stat. With even a moderately high bravery, Shira Hidori will make you all but immune to a wide array of attacks. We're talking physical attacks with weapons, ranged attacks with weapons, various different physical abilities. There's a lot that Shira Hidori can protect you from, and that makes it a wildly powerful ability. Now, of course, there are certain things that this will not be able to protect you from. Holy Sword abilities is one that just it can't do anything against. Magical attacks, especially things like other samurai that just have a guaranteed AoE hit, or summoners are really nasty. There's things that Shira Hidori won't be able to protect you against, and that's why having other defensive options in conjunction with it is very strong. For example, why I have equipped shields with an Aegis shield here on Ramza, just has 50% magical parry rate. Cool. So now I've got very good magical parry and extremely strong physical parry. Very difficult to get through that unless you have some very specific abilities going on. But for anything that is at all likely to be getting hit by physical damage, and those are going to be the majority of the attacks that you run into over the course of the game, Shira Hidori is a must-have if you expect to have high bravery. Moving on from Shira Hidori to something that is less defensive and more long-term offensive, we have Speed Surge being demonstrated by Rhea here. Now, Speed Surge comes from the Archer job, one of two different reaction abilities that they have, and it's kind of a weird fit for this job, because ideally if you're using archers right, they're not getting hit in the first place, but what it does is, upon receiving damage, it increases your speed for the duration of the battle, and this trigger percentage is also based off of your bravery. For anyone who knows the way that the action economy in Final Fantasy Tactics works, having more speed is an insanely powerful buff, and being able to put this on anything that might be getting targeted very frequently in melee, like a fairly tanky monk or other durable type of character, means that over the course of a fight, they will get progressively more and more ridiculously fast. If you're using a job that actually calculates speed into its damage formula, such as archers or in particular thieves and ninjas, this can mean a direct boost to damage as well, and if you're taking extra turns, that's a damage increase. It's a very potent ability. You just need to survive long enough to be able to regularly trigger all of these different speed gain options. If you can do that though, by the end of a battle, you will have an absolute lightning bruiser of a character, and that can be very, very nice to have. Is this something that you want on every single character? No, definitely not. But there's very few ways to boost speed in the game in general, things like Ramza's Tailwind or the haste spell from Time Mages, and there's a reason for that. Anything that lets you go faster, lets you manipulate the combat timeline, is a huge boon, and making it easier to do on characters that don't normally have access to that type of speed boost, again, like your knights, for example, is a great option. That will make them absolute terrors. Combined with the fact that you can get Speed Surge quite early compared to some of the other abilities that we've talked to, since you unlock Archer extremely quickly in the early game, it's actually not unreasonable to try and get this ability on a lot of people early on. If you're not sure what to put on a couple of your frontline melee fighters, or characters that you just expect to get targeted a lot, Speed Surge will definitely serve you well. It is a more offense-oriented type of option, so you're going to want some support for those characters, but still, you really can't go wrong with it. Speaking of early abilities, now we have to talk about Auto Potion, as demonstrated here by Moogle Mage. Auto Potion comes from the Chemist and is absolutely, bar none, the single most powerful reaction ability that you'll have in the early game. It costs 400 JP to learn, and upon receiving damage, uses a potion from the inventory to restore one's own HP, prioritizes the use of potions of lower potency, and again, the trigger percentage for this is exactly what your Brave is. So Moogle Mage would have a 67% chance to trigger Auto Potion every time he takes damage for any reason. Extremely powerful ability. Basically what this means, once you have high enough Brave, is you're just taking a certain flat amount of damage off of every hit, so long as you survive that hit. And what's cool is this can actually scale into the late game with you. At first, you'll be using regular potions, heal 30 HP when you get slapped for 50 damage, cool, you basically only took 20 damage. Get hit for actually less than 30 HP, Congratulations, you just got a free heal courtesy of the enemy. And because, as it says, it prioritizes the lowest level of potion that you have in your inventory, eventually you can just ditch all your potions entirely and have just high potions. Now you're healing for 70 every time you get hit by an attack. Get further in the game, now you're just using X potions on everyone. Cool, ditch all the high potions and regular potions, and now you're healing for 150 every time you take damage. And that is a massive amount of damage reduction. Auto potion is one of those set it and forget it abilities that almost feels like it's too powerful once you know how to manipulate the potions in your inventory to maximize it. Because you can get it so early, it's a very reliable option to put on literally every character that you have and just kind of be like, all right, cool, everyone just essentially has a bunch of free built-in temporary HP. Let's go, send them into battle. If you don't want to think any more about it, this is definitely a very strong general option. There is better, more specialized stuff, but you cannot go wrong with auto potion. No way, no how. We're down to our last two here, and I actually was originally only going to have one of these, but they really both are very good, more niche case abilities, so I figured we'd include both of them. First off, reflexes, as demonstrated by our ninja Tox. Reflexes does come from the ninja ability. It costs 400 JP, and it says upon receiving an attack, greatly increases physical and magical parry and evasion rates, ineffective against certain attacks. So basically what this means is by equipping reflexes, all of the evasion stats that you already have get improved. So if we look at our stats here, we have 30% physical evasion and 0% magical evasion, which stems from where our different class dodge rates and equipment dodge rates come from, right? We also have weapon parry, potentially cloak evasion. Reflexes gives a boost to these stats. So if you're trying to go for a more generally dodgy type of character, like say you've got a shield and you've got some sort of a cloak equipped on a character, and then you put reflexes on them, they're going to be generally quite dodgy, especially if you have them in a job that is better at dodging in the first place. Especially if you're getting attacked from the front or the sides, this can turn almost any character into a frustratingly difficult to hit target, and that can actually do a lot for you, as oftentimes it's only one good evade that you need to survive what would otherwise have been a fatal turn. It's not something that you want necessarily on everyone, and it benefits heavily from tailoring your gear towards it, but each new boost that you give to your evade rates will make reflexes even better. It's a very fun option. I highly recommend playing around with it, especially in this new version of the game where the description makes it a lot more clear what it's actually doing. There's a lot of fun stuff that you can do here, and you will be seeing it in our campaign near the end game for some of our characters' builds. Finally, our other slightly more niche option is Dragonheart, as demonstrated here by Yun Yun. So Dragonheart is a very fun ability. Upon receiving a physical attack, grants re-raise to the unit. You might ask yourself, Tom, isn't re-raise just when I go down, I just get back up? And the answer is yes. Yes, it is. And once again, the percentage that you're looking at is based on your brave here. The reason I have Dragonheart as a more niche option is because it's an ability that kind of is planning for failure. Right? There's a lot of discussion of abilities like this in video games, in card games like Magic the Gathering, hell, even in tabletop wargaming stuff like Warhammer. You don't really want to be in a position where you're planning to lose or where you're planning to be on the back foot. If you can, you want to put more resources into make your odds of winning even better than they already were. However, in games like Final Fantasy Tactics, it never hurts to have a little bit of a backup option in your back pocket, and that's what Dragonheart is. Because at the end of the day, if you know that you're going to have a heavy frontline character like a Dragoon that wears heavy armor, wades into the thick of things, tries to parry attacks with a shield while shanking stuff with a spear, same thing for knights, etc., then you know that you're going to be getting hit. And if you can plan for the fact that you're going to be getting hit, that is something that's going to be happening, and put your resources into other members of your team who need a little bit more support. If you can count on the fact that your frontline fighter will get down, but will also be able to get themselves up in the process, that is a pretty significant boon, and it makes them a little bit of a fire and forget style of character. So long as they don't get absolutely overwhelmed with raw damage from the jump and they have time to activate Dragonheart, which, so long as they're not completely underleveled and have good gear, you should be able to generally expect for that to happen outside of certain boss fights, then Dragonheart can actually be a very powerful option for you. It's not for every character necessarily, but as far as general use is concerned, frontliners would be happy to have this. Now, where Dragonheart can get fun, however, is if you take a little bit of time at the start of a battle, have Dragonheart equipped on all of your guys, and then just throw stones at everybody. You just line up in a little bit of a friendship circle and then have everyone beam the dude to their right with a stone to the temple. Now you've taken a little bit of damage, and so long as you have sufficient brave scores, everyone on your team suddenly has re-raise, and you can just basically be off to the races. And again, so long as you don't get mass nuked multiple times in a row, you should be able to keep raising your guys, which can be a very powerful and fun strategy to go for. You definitely have to build around it, and it takes away other options from you, but I gotta say, it is pretty fun to see at the same time. And that, my friends, is my 6 most highly recommended reaction abilities for Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles. Does that mean that other reaction abilities are not good? No. Does it mean that you can't have very good success with other reaction abilities? No, it just means that these are more generally applicable abilities that I would highly recommend everyone at least consider for many, if not all, job roles in their army. There's always going to be a use case for some specific scenario where maybe having critical recover HP will be the best possible thing you can do for a particular character. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what is just the most useful overall for as many potential characters and jobs, and I think this set of 6 really covers all of your options. Of course, I would love to hear what you guys have to say. If you have a particular reaction ability that you think fits that criteria, not just, I think it's really powerful and it's fun. Like, fine, you can tell us about that. But really, what I want to know is if you think that there are other reaction abilities that are absolute must-haves for anyone building any character. There are some really powerful things out there, such as Fury to get your physical attack up when you get hit, but that requires you getting all the way to Dancer. It's expensive, so while it is very useful, it's not as accessible as a lot of these other abilities are. Compare that to Auto Potion, which you can basically get in the first 30 minutes of the game with barely any focused grinding, and you can kind of see where the difference lies. But give me your thoughts, tell me what you think about all the different reaction abilities that are in the game, and as always, do continue letting me know what types of topics and videos you would like to see from me as well, so I can keep kind of drawing from what the community wants me to cover, not just what I think should be covered. It's midnight in the slums of the trade city of Dorter, and you've just entered a mysterious little hole in the wall that you were told would be of lucrative business opportunities for you. The floors are slick with fluids you'd rather not consider, and a strange little man behind a counter wielding a hunting knife smiles at you. You sling a sack that was laying across your shoulders upon the floor, and pelts come spilling out. His smile widens, and you know that incredible loot is about to be yours. Today we are discussing Poaching, which has seen some decent updates and upgrades in the Ivalice Chronicles that make it a fair bit more interesting and engaging to actually play around with compared to past versions of the game. This is another topic that I've received a lot of requests to cover, and don't worry, the Zodiac system, really, is still something that we're going to be working on, but I need a little bit more time to be able to make that happen, and I've been cooking this poaching video in the background for a little while, no pun intended, so I wanted to put this one out there first. Today we're going to be talking about the entire poaching system, what it even is, why you might want to do it, some of the early game benefits that you can get from it, and some of the most efficient ways that you can grind out some of the best loot that you can once you have the relevant monsters available, as well as how to get those monsters on your team. There's a lot to cover here, and I just gotta say, I'm glad that the team made the changes to poaching that they did, because it was basically something I never cared to bother with before, but now it actually feels interesting and engaging, and you can get some cool stuff. So, first off, what even is poaching? Poaching is a system that you gain access to in Chapter 3 of Final Fantasy Tactics, wherein you can go to any of the various different merchant or trade cities, such as the merchant city of Dorter, to access certain shops that will allow you to trade in carcasses that you have poached for certain items. Sometimes they're more mundane, sometimes they're more rare, depending on the quality of the carcass that you've attained. While there are many monsters that you can poach that will give you, like, as basic of an item as a potion, the benefit is that you'll get that item for 50% off what you would get it for buying it in the actual shop. So you do actually save a fair bit of money by doing this if you're just passively poaching monsters as you play through the game. Of course, you might ask yourself, how is it that I go about poaching monsters? I didn't see an option for this. You need to specifically learn the support ability Poach from Thieves, and then equip it on characters, have those characters get the final blow on a monster with their basic attack, and then you will poach the carcass. It's a simple system that's slightly esoteric to unlock just because, you know, there's so many different support abilities you can equip, you might not even notice that Poach exists, and you have this whole set of mechanics behind it, but if you do actually look into it and decide to utilize it, there can be some very nice stuff that you're able to get a hold of, and it's made all the easier to do now with the Ivalice Chronicles. So with that said, what has actually changed with this newest version of the game? Two major things, one of which is a little tangential but makes the whole process a whole lot easier. The first is that when you go and poach a monster, it will actually tell you directly whether you got a normal carcass or a rare carcass. And this will be denoted by a little like star symbol next to the name of the carcass, kind of similar to the symbol for shiny Pokemon if you're familiar with that. Unless the numbers have changed for this version of the game, and I don't believe that they have, you have a 1 in 8 chance every time you poach a monster of getting a rare carcass. Once you have poached the monster, you don't have to do anything else. Once you can actually access the poacher's shop in these various different trade cities, you'll see that it's there. You don't have to like do anything special. It's just in the menu, and then you can go ahead and buy the item if you so choose. If you don't choose, just not something that's particularly useful for you, you can just sell the carcass, get some bonus gold, and move on with your life. The second quality of life feature with this system, the more tangential one, is how much easier it is to retry fights now. Whereas in past versions of Final Fantasy Tactics, if you needed to restart a fight for whatever reason, you had to basically close the game, reopen it, reload your save, or if you were on the original PSX version, wholly restart the console. Now you can just go into the menu as soon as you're able to access it in battle and just hit retry. You don't even have to reset your formation if you don't want. You can just retry from the beginning of the battle and start all over again. This is so significantly faster than any previous method that, combined with the fact that you actually know before having to go to the poacher's shop if you got a rare carcass or not, that's like maybe a specific item that you're looking for, that you can much more easily farm for the gear that it is that you're trying to get access to. What previously was a system that could take 15 to 20 minutes or even up to multiple hours to find one particular piece of gear that you wanted to be able to put on your team has now been reduced significantly, to the point that I was able to get 3 very rare Night Swords far earlier than you'd normally be able to access them, just because it was so much easier for me to restart a battle, re-put in the monsters that I was trying to poach, see if I got the rare carcass, and then reset again and again until I was able to do so. This actually makes the system pretty worthwhile for your time, and is definitely a very positive change, as was outlined by the devs in the pre-release interviews that we got leading up to the game. So that's how the system works and how it's been changed. But what is the actual benefit for diving into this side system, right? Like, how good is the stuff that you can get? The answer is actually pretty dang good. Once you know what rare monsters to look for and how to actually farm the system properly, there is a ton of great stuff you can get, as I alluded to, such as Night Swords. I have 3 Defender Night Swords, a piece of gear that without poaching and without very specific endgame farming, you can only get one of by stealing it from a major boss. For context, the Defender is a devastatingly powerful physical attack Night Sword that also has an absolutely massive parry rate, and with it you can make devastatingly strong frontline characters who are incredibly difficult to hurt and then can also slap back extremely hard as a response when they do get attacked. And this is just one example. If you're smart and you go through and you actually recruit one of the potential pigs that you can get in Chapter 2, then spend the time to get a bunch of higher level pigs and then start farming them with poaching, you can get the incredibly powerful Chantage perfume that puts permanent re-raise and other buffs on your characters when you equip it on them. This essentially breaks the game completely in half, and note, I don't have footage of this, but if you're interested in the specific guide for this, you can go and check out Coffee Potato's poaching guide for it. But it's just another example of why this is such a strong system if you choose to put the time into grinding it all out. There's a myriad of other very powerful pieces of gear that you can get through the poaching system as well. I will have linked in the description a full roster of all of the different monsters that you can get that have high quality gear. I highly recommend that you peruse it if you choose to go and check this whole thing out. As far as I'm aware, that roster has not changed. None of the items have changed with this latest version of the game. If that is the case, my apologies, but as far as I know, nothing has changed here, and you're safe to use the below guide. So great, that's how the system works. That's what's changed about it. It's why you might be interested in doing it, but I can hear you asking, how are you actually able to target farm particular monsters, right? Are you just supposed to run into the same random battle over and over on a particular map in the hopes that a rare spawn of a monster that you want to poach shows up, and then if it doesn't, you have to do it all over again? No. That's not how you're going to go about things here. For this, we're going to be using the Mediator to recruit monsters and then begin breeding them, because what is poaching if not specifically farming different types of animals, right? So what you're going to need here, if you really want to dive into the poacher's mindset, is not only someone who has spent some time in Thief to be able to get the relatively cheap poach support ability, but also a mediator, or for old heads like myself, an orator. The mediator/orator is absolutely key because they are able to recruit monsters to your team. And as you may have learned if you've played through enough of Chapter 2 to recruit Boko the Chocobo, once you have a monster in your party, they will then begin to create eggs of their own species of monster that can then potentially hatch into the second and then eventually third tier of monster. Now, it's important to keep in mind here, the tier 1, for example, yellow chocobos for chocobos, can only lay eggs for the tier 2, and then to be able to get tier 3 monsters, you need to have the tier 2 that then lays an egg for a tier 3, but they could also lay a tier 1 egg. So you want to make sure that you're working your way through the ranks of monsters to get tier 2s so that you can begin trying to farm tier 3s. For chocobos, that would be yellow chocobo to black chocobo to red chocobo, and the guide that I have listed in the description will show you all of these different tiers of monsters. Rather than me going through every single one of them here, just cross-reference what you're looking for there and you'll find out pretty quick what it is that you need. To recruit these monsters, you will at baseline need a mediator with the Entice skill. This is an extremely cheap skill. It's one of the main reasons that you get a mediator in the first place, and it allows you to recruit both human and monster enemies. Once you do have this mediator, you want to boost their magic attack as much as possible through things like gear and specific skills, because magic attack is what dictates how successful Entice will be. It will still be a fairly low chance to hit, but you take your mediator into the battle where you can find the monster that it is that you want to recruit, have the rest of your team slaughter everything else in the enemy party until it is just that monster left, and then spend as much time as you need spamming Entice at it with your mediator until it finally joins you. You'll more likely than not only find tier 1 monsters in most battles that you go into, but that's fine. So long as you're able to find like a Treant, which are the monsters that you'll eventually be able to get the Defender Sword from, or rare things like behemoths, or high-level bombs, or what have you. So long as you have one of them, you will eventually be able to get all 3 tiers of them. Once Entice is successful, you can end the battle, recruit the monster to your team, and then begin running back and forth between every and all cities to begin producing monster eggs. For your sanity, I recommend targeting one family of monsters at a time. That way you can guarantee that any egg that you get is going to be for the monsters that you're trying to poach. You can then fill up your inventory with monsters, remove any ones that are not the tier that you're looking for, and then begin poaching. Do keep in mind as well, really quick before we move on to just the short battle section on how to efficiently poach things, if you do choose to use a class that is not a mediator for this attempt to entice, say maybe Black Mage, because it's in general going to have higher magical attack than mediator itself, you're going to want to make sure that you learn the support ability Beast Talk, or potentially the Tame action from mediator, so you can more easily recruit these monsters. Without Beast Talk, normal Entice won't work on them at all. You just need to make sure that you have the relevant skills equipped, as Mediator has Beast Talk innately, but other classes do not. Anyway, once you have the monsters that you are trying to poach, you can simply load into a very simple map. Most people are going to use Mandalia Plains. If you have a different map that you prefer for any reason, that's totally fine. It really does not matter what you choose here. And then deploy 4 of your characters and the monster that you're trying to poach. Ideally, each of your characters will have the poach skill equipped just for efficiency, but you don't need to do this if you don't want to. Once the map begins, before any enemies are able to approach you, you're going to want to have your poachees beat the crap out of the monster that you are trying to poach until they finally down it and poach it, and then watch and see if this little text box pops up here and says you got the regular carcass or the rare carcass. If you don't get the rare carcass, and that is what it is that you're looking for, which most of the time it will be, you can quickly open the menu, retry from the beginning of the battle, and do it all over again until you do finally get it. So long as you don't have horrible RNG, you should be able to find the carcass that you're looking for in 5 to 10 minutes. It usually does not take that long. And then if you have more of that monster that you're trying to farm, say you want multiple Defender Knight Swords, then you can finish the battle out, start another battle, put another copy of that monster in, and do the whole process over again. Note that you do need to successfully clear the fight. You do need to then go through, beat all of the enemies that are on the map, win it like you would any other battle, and then you will have successfully acquired your carcass and you can bring it to the shop at any time. There's 2 key things to keep in mind here. By and large, you need to use your basic attacks to be able to poach the monster. You can't have poach on like a Black Mage and then just nuke it with Flare and expect to get the corpse. That will not happen. And even though you can't access the Poacher's Den until you get to Chapter 3, you can still poach monsters prior to that. The carcasses will just show up once you get to the den in Chapter 3. So if you are lucky enough to, say, recruit a pig or some other rare monster and you don't feel like having them just sit filling up party space until you get to chapter 3, you can start poaching them earlier on and then go to the Poacher's Den later on. And that's the long and short of the process. Once you go to the Poacher's Den, you look through all the list of monsters that you have carcasses of, you will see which ones were normal, which ones were rare, and which ones give you specific gear that you can typically only buy through the Poacher's Den, so you know what the good stuff is. Some of these items can be very pricey, so do expect that, but if you're doing this type of grind, then you probably have enough money from grinding other battles for other reasons anyway, so I wouldn't be too worried about that. Using this system, you can find rare hair accessories like berets and ribbons that make you immune to some, if not all, status effects, the aforementioned Chantage and Defender, which are some of the most powerful basic accessories and weapons in the game, and potentially some other fun stuff that I won't necessarily spoil. I'll let you find that out for yourself as you dig through the list of poachable monsters. This has always been a really cool system that is a nice way to be able to really min-max your characters and get some powerful loot earlier than you normally would be able to, if you would normally be able to get it at all. But it was always so much of a pain that I never really would recommend that anyone mess with it unless they were on like their second or third or latter run of the game and wanted to do something different. Now, because it is so much easier to restart battles, because it is so much more obvious when you get a rare carcass, it is actually something that has some play to it. So I do recommend, especially if this is your first time playing the game, that you experiment with doing some poaching. I, in particular, am very much enjoying my Defender, Parry, Frontline Knight Paladin, who is absolutely untouchable in almost every capacity, deals good damage in melee, and has a full suite of white magic to support himself and his allies. And it would be a far less successful build without having poached the Defender so early on, just as an example of the type of thing that you can do. If you do choose to engage in the poach system, if you have any other tips for more speedy and efficient poaching, or you just get a really cool item that enables a strong build, tell us about all that in the comments. Start up a conversation, give some hints to your fellow players, and maybe together we can find some truly ridiculous options. If there's one overarching set of questions that I've gotten the most since the release of Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles, it has to do with character and party building. So what better time than to bring back an absolute classic from the Unicorn Overlord era, the Steal This series, by introducing the Steal This squad for Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles early game. So as this is the first entry for the Steal This series in Final Fantasy Tactics, there's a couple of points that we need to go over here. First of all, yes, while I am giving you a squad that you can directly copy for the early game of Final Fantasy Tactics, this is more meant to inspire your own build creativity and give examples of how you can start to do some pretty fun stuff even early in the game. If you want to just rip this whole team and use it for great success, then by all means you can, but what I would really like to see is people drawing some level of interest in how they can get a little bit more creative with putting together different sets of weapons and abilities and gear and armor and accessories and all that type of fun stuff to make their own fun, unique builds. That will be true across all the videos of this type that we do going forward, but I want to put the disclaimer out there now because people always get like weirdly defensive about being like, well, don't just tell people how to play the game. Well, I'm not just telling them how to play the game. I'm trying to show them how to play the game, and I think there's a difference there. Second of all, yes, I'll be upfront about this. I am using my Chapter 4 team as a base for this just because I have the most skills and abilities unlocked. However, with the way that unit leveling and equipment work in Final Fantasy Tactics, it's pretty much a moot point. You can get to whatever level you want in whatever chapter you want. There will be people who are level 99 playing Chapter 1. There will be people who are level 39 like Ramza here is at Chapter 1. Like, doesn't really matter. What dictates more of what your combat capability is what gear that you have and what abilities that you have. That's how you can take level 1 squires into Chapter 4, and they're a little delicate, but as long as you have good gear on them and take a little bit of care of them, they can fight with the best of them. So don't worry if you don't have stats that exactly match up with mine or anything like that. I've equipped the relevant gear that you are likely to be able to find in the early game, defined as like end of Chapter 1, midway point of Chapter 2. So you would be able to recreate very similar types of builds without any issues whatsoever. With those disclaimers out of the way, we have 5 characters to talk about today to comprise a full squad. Each of them has their own build going on. You can of course mix and match, swap around different pieces of gear to tweak things the way that you would like, especially as you progress through the game and maybe find better pieces of gear to like just give someone a better sword, right? Ramza here doesn't have a mithril sword because it's the best thing. It's just like a sword that would be available at that point in the game. If you have something better, you have something you like more, put it on, that's totally fine. So then let's talk about Geomancy Ramza here. There's a ton of different builds you can do for Ramza, absolutely. but I do always enjoy giving him a little bit of a Spellblade option, as he does have good bravery, he does have good faith, and he does have balanced physical and magical stats as well. So he's a very good option for things like Geomancer or later Samurai, as I highlighted in my Ramza build video from the other day. This build reflects that without needing a real ton of grinding at all, basically just playing Squire for a while and then playing Geomancer will get you this build online. To start, for equipment, he has the Mithril Sword, the Mithril Shield, a Wizard's Hat, a Wizard's Robe, and a Mage's Cloak. Geomancer is very nice because it allows you to have sword and board for melee combat, while also allowing you to equip a variety of different clothes and robes to maximize your magical capabilities. Here I have him equipped with 3 different pieces that all increase his magic attack power, giving him a nice boost of 4, meaning that without needing to give any other boosts through skills, he's still going to be able to deal a decent amount of damage with Geomancy. Even on Tactician, the way that I've been playing the game, this is a very versatile setup to have. It lets you get things like shield parries, it lets you deal physical damage, and gives you enough HP and evasion to survive, while still being able to fill the role that you want to fill with the skills that you have available. On Tactician, Geomancy is a very nice skill to have, as it does give you a good variety of ranged chip damage and an AoE with instant cast, so you can start picking down enemies that are pretty nasty before they can get to you, and also periodically apply very beneficial status effects. We've talked about it before, but Geomancy being able to just randomly stone, confuse, disable, stop all sorts of different enemies can be a huge force multiplier for you when you aren't even necessarily expecting it. It's just a little bit of a win more sometimes, and it can really swing the battle in your favor even if you are struggling. Because the skills are so cheap as well, again, you really don't need to do a ton of grinding to get the important ones equipped, and there's ones that just will not be relevant in the early parts of the game, such as, magma and snow and options like that. You don't need to worry about getting those, so you can get the pertinent skills very easily and then start cruising from there. We will then, of course, have Metal equipped. Metal is phenomenal for Ramza as his unique class ability, especially in Chapter 2 when you get access to Steel. Steel is phenomenal as it allows you to start boosting the bravery of your allies, which is going to be very important for their survivability. Absolutely something you want to be focusing on, especially on Tactician, and then does give you your options like Tailwind to boost speed and your normal Squire options like Focus, Rush, Throwstone, etc. There's really very little reason outside of extremely specific builds to take Metal off of Ramza in the early sections of the game. It will serve you well. We then have Auto Potion. Auto Potion is an absolute must-have on Tactician, especially in the early game. You could also opt for something like Parry if you wanted to have a little bit more defense in terms of evading damage in the first place, but Auto Potion is just a great all-rounder. Enemies hit extremely hard on Tactician and still hit hard on other modes as well, so being able to guarantee that you're going to be able to blunt some of that damage with potions, especially high potions if you ditch your base level potions, is always a good option to have. You will see it on a few of the other characters in this squad. We then have Attack Boost, which comes directly off of Geomancer. This is nice as we already have a good amount of magic damage, as we discussed, but now with Attack Boost, your physical attacks will also be quite powerful as well, meaning that no matter what situation Ramza is in, he is going to be able to deal good damage. And then, of course, we have Movement +1. We don't have any boots equipped in this setup. Geomancer does have a base 4 move, but 5 is a good breakpoint for being able to really maneuver around the battlefield and maneuver around enemies, so being able to get that little boost is nice. Of course, if you dip into Thief for a little while, get Movement +2 or something like that, that is also fine as well. That is Geomancy Ramza. It's a very solid contender. I'm happy to see that it does still hold up in Tactician as well, especially because there is more of a focus on disabling enemies, especially in the early game. So this is a phenomenal option for you. Moving on, we have Rhea the Monk, and Monk is always a strong option, but this is a little bit more of a defensive option due to the fact that enemies do hit so much harder on Tactician. That's always one of the weaknesses of Monk, especially in the early game before their high HP growth really is able to kick in, so being able to fortify that a little bit using heavier armor is nice. We have a golden helm and golden armor, as mentioned. There's a lot of different pieces of plate armor that you'll be able to get in the early game. That'll make your monk more defensive and will be very useful before you start to unlock a lot of the really powerful clothes items, especially considering that normally you can't equip headpieces with monks unless it's like a beret or a ribbon or something of that kind. It's a good way to get a nice HP boost going on. We also have power gauntlets because, of course, monks do want to be hitting as hard as they possibly can, and alongside boosting brave, this is the best way that you can do that for your monks. We then obviously have martial arts. Getting as many of these different abilities online as possible is huge. Aura Blast for some range damage alongside Shockwave once you can unlock it, which does take a fair while, and I would prioritize other skills first, are very good to give your monks some options. And then, of course, Chakra and Revive are phenomenal. If slightly more limited healing and support options, you still definitely want some white magic magic or some items, just in case someone dies or is in an awkward position where the height limits of Chakra and Revive will kind of get in the way. But being able to just walk up and instant res somebody or restore a bunch of HP and MP is absolutely phenomenal. We then have Fundaments for similar reasons to Ramza having metal, just being able to focus to increase your physical attack power, and then Throw Stones and Rush, which are both boosted by the brawler that Monk has innately, do also give you some nice options. Focus in particular is really the way that you're going to be going here. Just charging up your ki as much as you can for that one giant punch once you start swinging is always fun. We then have Speed Surge. Took a little bit of a dip into Archer for this one, and I do think it's a worthy option. Monks are, of course, going to be on the front line. They're going to be swinging, they're going to be taking hits, and being able to get more and more speed as you do so will be phenomenal. If you spend a little bit of time at the beginning of the fight, using focus, getting your physical attack up, then start getting into the fray and getting speed as well, over the course of the battle, you're going to be a whirlwind of destruction. And because we do have equip heavy armor, to have that plate armor equipped, you'll have a lot more HP to be able to tank some of these initial hits and start getting those speed stats up. This is of course dependent on your brave, so this is where you're going to be wanting characters like Ramza to be using steel on your monk to get her bravery up. But once you have that online, you will have a devastating fighter here. Finally, we have movement +2. Once again, like with Ramza, movement +1 would also be good. Just a movement boost in general would be great here. Monks do only have an innate move of 3, and you probably want something like a power gauntlet or maybe even a cloak to boost your damage or your survivability rather than boots. So getting that movement boost here is definitely the way to go. This is a devastating frontline tank and melee damage dealer, and that's good because you are going to have a lot of enemies that you're going to need to be keeping away from your squishies, especially before you have some more good defensive options later in the game. Speaking of squishies, let's move on and talk about Sasha. This is just a standard black mage build, but the thing with magic is there's so many different ways to go that I think it does bear covering why this type of build is going to be a little bit more efficient than others. Starting right off, we have a Thunder Rod, a Wizard's Hat, a Wizard's Robe, and a Mage's Cloak. We have these pieces of gear for the exact same reason that we have them on Ramza, to boost our magic attack as high as possible, but then the Thunder Rod is actually an interesting pick. Early in the game, you basically have 4 different rods that you could equip, other than, the basic rod that you want to get rid of as soon as you possibly can. Thunder Rod, Fire Rod, Blizzard Rod, and Poison Rod. The Poison Rod is an interesting choice if you want to try to walk up and whap things with it to be able to put poison on it, but not really the position that you want to be in, especially on Tactician. So instead, you want to choose one of the elemental rods to lean your black mage towards. As you can see here from the description, a rod imbued with the power of thunder, when attacking, has a chance of casting thunder, and the equipment effect boosts lightning. Since we're trying to avoid an overt amount of grinding, you're going to want to be able to put the maximum amount of JP into a particular school of magic. For this black mage, that would of course be thunder magic, and the reason I choose Thunder Magic is it's the most universally applicable in the early game. There's nothing that resists it, and there's a lot of rain on various different maps, which will also boost the damage of Thunder Magic, as opposed to Blizzard, which requires you to be in snowy environments, which, as we've discussed with Ramza, you will not be in the early game, except for one final battle in Chapter 1, which, not that difficult to deal with anyway. You really don't need Blizzard Magic for that fight, so it's whatever. Or Fire, which is only boosted in desert environments, which you could be in, but then you also have enemies like bombs who just absorb fire or have blizzard, so it just seems to me to be the most beneficial to have thunder magic in the early game. You will want all schools of magic mastered eventually, but we're talking early days here. As part of that, of course, we do have black magics equipped, as you must when you are playing a black mage. This is a devastatingly powerful school of magic. You can do a ton of great stuff between flare, poison, death, frog, all of your different elemental magics. Black mages are a mainstay for the entire game for a reason. To accompany this, we have time magic, and really in the early game, all you need is haste. If you get some other stuff online, by all means, like slow can be very good to kind of neutralize enemies a little bit. Immobilize is the same. And the good thing about the really powerful early game utility magic for time magic is that the JP costs are pretty low. So you can dip into it for a very short amount of time and pick up the couple of skills that you need to complement your black magic. Most of the time, you do want to just be nuking stuff, but at the beginning of the battle, maybe being able to get your entire team hasted, or maybe being able to immobilize a cheeky knight that's parrying and blocking and just generally being a nuisance is very, very handy. I see a lot of people like to put both white magic and black magic on their black mage, but you're really kind of doing dual duty then with what you want that character to be doing at any given point in the fight, and generally this is a damage dealing unit from the backline. So just having the option to, at the very beginning of the fight, when you can't deal any damage to anything, make the team even more deadly and then just go rip, to me is much more efficient. We then of course do have auto potion. There's not a ton of great reaction abilities early in the game for black mages, so once again, like with Ramza, having the ability to blunt the damage that they take is very beneficial for them because they are extremely squishy and enemies hit brutally hard on Tactician. We then do have magic boost. This might take you a little while to unlock if you're also really trying to lean into the higher levels of the spell class that you've chosen for your black mage, but once you can get it, it is just so nice. You have the School of Magic learned that you want to have, you boost the damage of it with your rod, all of the rest of your gear, and magic boost. You will be horrified at how much damage your black mages are going to deal. And then once again, we have movement +1. This is particularly key because we have a mage's cloak for the magic boost, or eventually mage power gloves once you can get those, then you're not going to have much movement. And if an enemy does manage to close on your black mage, you want to have the opportunity to try to get away from them, or at least move past an ally to put them between you and the enemy that's currently attacking you. So there's plenty of options you can go with here, especially later in the game. Things like Mana Font are great, etc. But early, movement +1 is a good option. Now we talked about a more offense-oriented mage. Now let's talk about a more support-oriented mage with a Mystic as represented by Jason WFD here. Mystic is always a slept-on job, but I think especially on Tactician, where, as mentioned, being able to disable enemies a lot more reliably is so valuable, really boosts their usefulness. And they're a decent combat unit as well. Much to the surprise of people that don't like to experiment with stuff, Mystics can hit pretty hard because their Battle Bamboo, or any other pole that they're wielding, actually deals damage based on their magic attack rather than their physical attack. And it can be a pretty chunky amount of damage. So we do have the Battle Bamboo here. Whatever the best pole that you have available to you will be perfectly fine. Later in the game, you'll get ones that inflict special effects, but not at this point. And then the standard array of Wizard's Hat, Wizard's Robe, and Mage's Cloak. This is really going to be the setup that you want on pretty much any mage at the point of the game that we're talking about here, unless for some reason you really need a little bit of extra HP or specific MP or something along those lines. Where things get interesting is where we get into our abilities. The reaction, support, and movement abilities are going to be identical to our black mages. Again, you don't have a ton of great options for mages in the early game, but this is a very strong setup for pretty much anyone that you could use. What changes is with our Mystic Arts and our white magics. Mystic Arts are great because they have a huge array of different status effects that you're going to be able to put on the enemy. Things like Umbra, not so great, but Empowerment and Invigoration to be able to drain HP and MP and give them to your Mystic is a ton of fun. Belief, Disbelief, being able to boost or reduce Faith can be so much fun. If you have a knight that's going to be hit by a bunch of different mages, put some Disbelief on him, he'll become completely immune. Or at the start of the fight, cast Belief on your black mage and watch her absolutely tear house. It's a ton of fun. Then you have other fun options like Corruption, being able to turn enemies undead so you can just instantly down them with Phoenix Downs. Fervor to berserk distant units like a mage so it can only run up and try and hit you with its staff. Quiescence to silence groups of enemies who are trying to cast spells. Trepidation to reduce Brave to make it less likely that a unit will be able to activate its reaction ability. There's so many fun different options here, and that's before we can get into high cost stuff like Induration to just inflict stone on them. Mystic is a very, very useful job, and with his ability to deal damage in melee, these are very nice options to have for support. Leading into that, we do have white magics as well. The basic array of white magic will be more than enough for you in the early game. Cure, Raise, Protect, and Shell. Much like with Time Magic on our Black Mage, being able to just drop a huge party-wide AoE Protect to boost your physical defense, or Shell to boost your magical defense is phenomenal. And then just having some extra healing and rezzing ability with Cure and Raise, great. Eventually, if you want to try to pick up Cura, even Curaga, maybe some of the other more involved skills, cool. But in the early game, these four will be everything that you need to have a successful supporter. It's a pretty simple setup overall, but it can do a magical amount of work, no pun intended. And sometimes, if you need to just club an enemy upside the head, stick it with a bamboo piece. You'll do a lot more damage than you would think. Finally, we've been talking about a lot of backline support and magic and things. So let's talk about a traditional frontline tank, shall we? But maybe with a little bit of extra fun in there as well. Here we have Kejo, the basic Paladin, sort of. Kejo is actually one of my best units in my full campaign run in Chapter 4 right now. He is an absolute beast of a Paladin, and you can get a pretty equivalent setup fairly early on, so I figured I'd scale him back a little bit and show you guys exactly how he works. His gear setup is actually a little eclectic for what you might expect for a knight, but it is because we're leaning into that Paladin idea. He does have the Blood Sword, sword, which we'll talk about in a second, don't worry, gold shield and helm, wizard's robe, and mage's cloak. Again, these pieces of armor, you can just sub out for whatever the strongest piece that you have at the time is. It's not a huge deal. The wizard's robe and the mage's cloak are particularly nice because, as you can see, we're planning to cast a bunch of white magic here, and that will boost the amount of healing that he does with said magic. Because knights can wear robes, this does allow us to get a decent magic boost for him, and then the mage's cloak that pulls double duty by giving us more magic attack, and then also more cloak evade to lean into having a shield and parry, which again, we'll talk about. Now, the blood sword is an interesting choice, and I can see people calling me out on this because you do get the blood sword close to the end of chapter 2, so you're starting to edge out of the early game there, but if you do have it, this is a great option for any sort of frontline knight like this, because when you attack, it restores your HP. So now you have a frontline tank who's meant to be sitting in front of your most valuable and squishy allies, taking hits, and then being able to swing back and recover his own HP is a great way to keep some sustain going on the battlefield. If you don't have this, whether you were not able to steal it from a particular boss, or you're just not at that point in the game yet, that's fine. Again, you can toss on a mithril sword, whatever. It's just a nice little boost for when you do have the opportunity to take a swing and regen some HP. Moving over to discuss our skills, of course, we do have Arts of War. Again, much like with Mystic, being able to disable enemies in certain ways is great, and the Ren set for that is awesome. Being able to remove problematic pieces of gear, and more importantly, being able to neuter stats is phenomenal. Speed in particular is a great way to make a threatening enemy way less scary, even bosses. So Arts of War is very nice for that. We then do have white magics that we can, much like with our Mystic, continue to support the team, and you can do a decent amount of support with a knight. They won't have a ton of mana, so again, unless you're like late in the game like I am, you're not going to be casting Holy, even if you have it, which really would not be a wise use of your JP that early in the game. But again, Cure, Raise, Protect, Shell, it'll just give you options so that if, God forbid, something does happen to your other support units, you still have the ability to do something with your Paladin. This does mean that you're going to want to boost your faith or have just high faith on the unit if possible. If you get an orator to be able to do that, cool. Otherwise, if you want to try to get a build like this online, just try to find a recruit that has around 70 faith and you'll be in decently good shape. We then have parry because we do want as many defensive options as possible, and once you have a shield, a sword with a good parry rate, and a cloak, it's going to be pretty hard to consistently deal damage with anything that isn't like guaranteed hit skills on this type of knight. To accompany that, we do have defense boost as well, so if something does get through and it isn't magic, which is going to be a lot of attacks in the game, you'll just take less damage overall. And then again, movement +1, because we don't have boots, knights only have base 3 movement. We've talked about why this is important, and you want to be able to like keep your frontliner in front of your other characters as you're moving around. I love this build. It's kind of considered to be a little bit of a basic build in the community, but again, on Tactician, I think it gains a lot more value because you do need something that can absorb a lot of hits while the rest of your team picks away at enemies that are way tougher than they used to be. And that, my friends, is the squad. I think it's a pretty solid setup. Again, don't worry about the levels and the exact stats that I have right now. You can recreate this with the gear and the abilities that I highlighted very easily at any early point in the game. And a setup like this will absolutely carry you through, even on Tactician. You'll note that we have a pretty common setup here. We have 3 primary frontliners with our Paladin, our Monk, and our Geomancer. Again, it's a knight, but I call it a paladin because, you know, knight and white magic, whatever, you get it. So you'll have 3 people on the front line taking hits, swinging in melee, throwing out some other abilities, and then 2 backliners with a primary damage dealer and a primary support. This type of general setup is what you'll find yourself falling into a lot. It is certainly not the only viable type of party by any means, but if you're looking for either just some inspiration for a new type of squad to use, or maybe you're new or returning and have not played in a long time, and want a little bit of a refresher on what would be a good all-around team setup, you could certainly do worse than this. If you in particular have different types of parties that you really enjoy using, or different types of character setups that are viable in the early game without a ton of grinding, then do please chat it up in the comments down below. Give some people some inspiration, share some ideas. There's been a lot of good chatter on my videos about how people like to play the game, people sharing those types of ideas, and I would certainly like to see even more of that on videos like this. Lovers of spell slinging and magic missiling of all kinds, rejoice. This one is for you, because today we're talking about a mid-game mage build for a team comp for Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles on Tactician mode that I think quite a few of you are going to enjoy. So yes, it's another day and another entry in the Steal This Squad series, and as such, we do still have two short disclaimers that we have to provide. First of all, as always, the goal of the Steal This Squad series is to get people interested in how they can build fun custom teams for themselves. If you would like to just directly rip this team that I'm presenting today, or a direct variation of it, by all means you can do so, but more importantly to me, I want to see people be inspired by what it is that I'm presenting here, as there are so many different ways in games like FFT to create fun, flavorful, thematic, and most importantly, functional teams that don't just have to go down a direct meta route that people on the internet will tell you is, oh, it's the best way to play. Okay, but it's not the only way to play. And I like to inspire people to try out some of those more out there options that are actually quite fun if you give them the chance to shine. Second of all, I am still using my endgame team for this, so you're going to see fairly high levels for what would be a mid-game team, quote unquote. But as in the previous entry for a beginner team, you can see here, all of our characters are decked out in pretty much middle-of-the-road mid-game gear. Now, I define mid-game as basically end of Chapter 2 through the entirety of Chapter 3. That's going to be one of the biggest spans of time in the game that isn't direct end game, which is basically all of Chapter 4. So there's a large variety of different jobs, abilities, and gear that you are likely to get a hold of over the course of that time. So we have a little bit of a smattering of eras, shall we say, in that period here, but they all fit within the mid-game time frame. So with those two disclaimers out of the way, what is the team comp here? Today we have a very fun comp that is very focused around magical damage and support with Izzy, Tox, Kelvin, Rhea, and Cherish, with the Summoner, Geomancer, Black Mage, Monk, and we'll talk about that, and Mystic jobs respectively. We'll go through here, but this is a team that is very focused on getting a lot of buffs and empowerment online in the early turns of the battle, and then just absolutely nuking as many enemies as possible as quickly as possible while still sustaining those big damage dealers through direct support. Starting off, we do have Izzy the Summoner here. He is rocking a Mage's Staff, a Wizard's Hat, Wizard's Robe, and Mage Power Gloves. This, as mentioned in other versions of these types of builds, is a great way to absolutely maximize your magic attack power. Every piece of gear here gives you magic attack boosts. Mage's Staff gives you +1, the Wizard's Hat gives you +1, the Wizard's Robes give you +2, and the Mage Power Gloves give you +2 as well. This leads to a whopping boost of +6 to our magic attack, a 66% boost to what Izzy has naturally, which is awesome. This means that all of his summons are going to be dealing big damage or big healing, and he's going to be very capable at his given role. That role is largely blow up the enemy as quickly as possible with big summoner spells as he can. There is some healing in here with things like Moogle, there's some support with things like Golem, but primarily we want to be dealing elemental damage with Shiva, Rama, Ifrit. You can get Titan, we can pick that up right now because I have the JP, and then bigger options such as Cyclops or Lich. There's a lot of power here, and if you can make the best use of it, you'll be able to clear huge swaths of enemies all in one go, and he's one of our two primary damage dealers for that role. Alongside that, as a support option, we do have time magics. Primarily, you're just going to be using this to cast haste, but we do have things like slow and immobilize if you find yourself in an awkward situation where you need to be able to do a little bit of crowd control on the enemy and you can't just blow them up outright, which can happen. Then we have a few different support abilities here. We have Auto Potion for some healing, Swift Spell, this is a big one, to be able to get those summons out really, really fast. Even though charge times have been reduced massively in the Ivalice Chronicles, summons still take a long time to be able to put on the field, so being able to make that happen a little bit faster is a great option for you. Finally, we do have Mana Font because, again, summons also cost a lot of mana, and while we do have ways to restore mana on this team, just being able to get some back naturally as you're walking around can absolutely be the difference between casting the summon that you need and be basically high and dry. He's a very powerful combatant. He will clear huge chunks of the enemy, if not outright one-shotting them, at least massively damaging them and making them easy to clean up for the rest of your team. Summoners are great, and on this team in particular, Izzy or any other summoner will absolutely kick ass. Continuing on from Izzy, we have Tox the Geomancer here, one of our mana batteries and one of the only frontliners that we have in the party. This is a very variable role. We'll talk about at the end of the video some of the other types of characters that you can put into this position, but as it stands, this is what I have on the team. Tox is running one of my favorite Geomancer setups with the Blood Sword, the Aegis Shield, Wizard's Hat, Wizard's Robe, and Red Shoes. This is just a sustained magic damage setup. The Blood Sword to get some easy lifesteal when you decide to go into melee, the Aegis Shield to give you a magic damage boost while also boosting your magic evade, Wizard's Hat and Wizard's Robes for the previously mentioned magic attack boost that Izzy had, and the Red Shoes to again keep that magic attack up while also giving us extra movement so that Tox can get where I need him to be when I need him to be there. As always, if you don't have the Blood Sword, you can use pretty much any other sword that you want. I do just like it for the little bit of extra lifesteal that it gives. As far as his setup is concerned, he of course does have Geomancy so that he can get very quick, easy snipes at range and potentially apply some status effects. But then the more important one here actually is Martial Arts. Martial Arts is going to be here for one purpose and one purpose only, primarily. Chakra and Revive. This is a direct support setup. If someone goes down, we need to be able to res them. If someone's running out of mana or is low on HP, we need to be able to fix those. 99% of the time, once you get into combat, these are the skills that you're going to be using on your Geomancer. Sometimes you'll pop out a Shockwave or an Aura Blast to help you pick off a low health enemy or weaken them slightly so that a spell will finish them off. Absolutely, that is possible. But when it comes down to it, you want to be backing up your team and doing so without needing to worry about casting, because successive casts will make those casts take longer, and sometimes you need to be able to guaranteed pop out some support immediately, you know what I'm saying? Beyond this, it's a pretty flexible build. I went with First Strike here just because it is a solid option for negating physical damage in melee. Anything else that you want to be able to get, Shirahidori is great. You can go for parry here. You can even go for like counter with the Blood Sword or other options like that, critical recover HP. It's not super specific, but that's fine because you just want this to be a frontliner who can take hits and keep the enemy away from your actual major casters while they're charging and doing their work. I just like First Strike with the Blood Sword because, again, like you can negate a physical attack and then also get healing as a result. So it gives you a pretty decent amount of sustain, and with 87 Bravery, you'll be triggering it more often than not. Then we have Magic Boost to make our Geomancy casts even stronger, and you can even see in some of the footage that I have here, he's hitting for like high to mid 60s, which is pretty solid for a Geomancy cast, especially if you can catch multiple enemies with it or apply a status effect. That will actually do a lot of work over the course of a mission. And then I have Movement +2 just because he had Movement +2 available. Movement +1 is fine. Something like Life Font is fine. Other movement options are fine. Again, you don't need anything super specific with this character. It is definitely more of a support and defend type of role, and that means that the abilities that you go with can be very, very easy. Moving on to our other damage dealer of the party, we have Kelvin the Black Mage. Kelvin is rocking a Thunder Rod, a Celebrant's Mitre, a Wizard's Robe, and the Mage's Cloak. Again, we're focusing on boosting our magic attack as much as possible here, but because we're in the mid-game and we wouldn't have access to things like the Wizard's Rod that you get access to later, Thunder Rod is a great option because I do have a focus of lightning magic on Kelvin. You run into a lot of rainy maps. It's a very solid type of spell because it doesn't really have anything that majorly resists it, so you can do good damage to pretty much every type of enemy in the game, as well as dealing bonus damage to dangerous enemies like squids, so it's a nice all-around option. The Celebrant's Mitre is the direct upgrade for the Wizard's Hat, and you will get access to it, I believe, fairly early in Chapter 3, if not right off the bat in Chapter 3. It's just the Wizard's Hat, but with better stats. It just gives you more HP and MP. So, like, once you can have these, you want them. For other characters that we've had, such as Tox, who has the Wizard's Hat, like, you can just upgrade to the Celebrant's Mitre once you have it. I'm trying to represent here the range of different types of gear that you can have through this mid-game period. We do still have the Wizard's Robe here as well. This really is such a hard one to replace. Eventually, you will get access to things like the Black Robe, which does boost your elemental affinity, which is a very solid option as well, but it will take a little while before you unlock those, and as such, for raw damage, the Wizard's Robe is really hard to beat for a very good chunk of the game. And finally, we have the Mage's Cloak, just to make it a little bit easier to dodge incoming attacks. God forbid there's like a nasty archer, or something slips through your defenses because it can move really fast, or it can fly. Giving your Black Mage the ability to dodge that little bit more reliably is definitely good, while still also boosting your magic attack. We then do have black magics, and I mean, it's black magics, right? Like, you're going to have all the spells eventually. Kelvin has black magic mastered, so he's got all of them. But at the midpoint of the game, you probably want to be focusing on one particular spell school. Again, the thunder magic here, as well as then some of the other options just for a little bit of elemental coverage, and then things like flare for big single target damage, toad to neutralize a dangerous enemy, etc. We then have items here for a little bit of backup support, because let's be honest here, sometimes your monks are going to be in a position where they're not going to be able to res a target because of the height issue, or same thing with chakra. Being able to just say, nope, my damage dealer needs to res someone this turn, or needs to give them a big X potion, or hell, needs to just provide himself or someone else mana. Having items to be able to do that is nice, and there's really nothing else on this team in particular that Kelvin needs to be doing. We have all the other support that we need, and he deals more than enough damage on his own with black magic, so items is a good fill option. We then have auto potion. I don't have very high brave on Kelvin, but ideally you would want him to. There's really no reason not to. It's just not something that I've gotten around to yet. And auto potion, much like the mage's cloak, will give you a lot more survivability if something does happen to sneak through and hit you. We then, of course, have magic boost, because again, as a damage dealer, we want to be putting out as much magical damage as possible. And then movement +1. You could, again, really go with anything here. Mana font to keep your mana up would definitely be a solid option. Life font to keep restoring HP as well, definitely good. But sometimes you like to be able to just get out of the way of the enemy, or be able to navigate into position to get big buffs at the start of the fight. Very simple, very efficient. You can never go wrong with a black mage. Next up, we have Rhea, and this is the one that I said we would have to come back to, and we will do so now. Obviously, Rhea is not a mage herself. She's not doing anything magical here. However, her job name does start with an M, and so we have a little bit of alliteration going on, and she, again, much like Tox, is going to be primarily a mana battery and support option. As such, she's got two very basic items, a Brigandine for the HP and a Power Gauntlets to boost her physical attack, and then she has a pretty standard complement of skills for a monk. Again, she has martial arts, focusing on chakra and revive, with things like Aura Blast and Shockwave for some range damage when needed. Items, again, for some off support, just in the rare case where you don't have the right height distance for your martial arts to do your support, or if you need a more specialized or a bigger heal, like you have that going for you. Speed Surge is nice because she will be on the front line and taking hits, and of course, as a monk, you do want to have high brave in the first place, so you'll be triggering Speed Surge a lot, make it so you can take more turns, restore more HP and MP, it's always nice. Attack boosts that when we do need to start swinging with our fists, we can deal a good amount of damage to hopefully finish off a target, or at least weaken it for our mages. And then move +2 so we can get into the front line and not need to worry about having a movement accessory on and be able to focus more on our attack there. Again, very simple. It is a second backup option to keep your mages fueled up. And with how many spells you're going to be slinging around, and in the mid game, how relatively shallow your MP pool can be, being able to keep them really kind of charged up and swinging away with big magic spells is going to be vital to keep this team functional. Finally, we have Cherish, who is set up here as a Mystic, and this is actually a pretty important character here for this team, even if it is fairly limited. She's rocking a Musk pole. Doesn't really matter what pole you're using, whatever the strongest one you have available at the current time is the one that you're going to want to go with, unless it's a Goku pole, because you don't want to accidentally hit something and put Atheist on it and now no longer be able to hurt it. So avoid that, but anything else is good, and you do want a pole specifically for a reason that we'll talk about in a second. We then, again, have the standard complement of magic attack boosting stuff, Celebrant's Mitre, Wizard's Robe, Mage's Cloak. Mage's Cloak is important because the Mystic is kind of a frontline fighter, and that will be part of the role that Cherish or an equivalent would be fulfilling on this team. So again, having a little bit of extra evade is definitely going to be beneficial for you. We then have Mystic Arts, and there's one particular ability in here that is more important than all the others, and that is Belief. Belief is a spell that puts a temporary faith boost on any character that you target with it. It does only target one character at a time, and this does not give you a permanent boost to your faith like over time. It doesn't boost your actual faith stat, it just puts a status effect on you. But this is huge because it will max out your faith score on a character. So at the start of a game, if you decide, oh, I need to really quickly toss out a Thundara spell, maybe it's not going to deal enough damage to just one-shot a dangerous enemy because it's a lower level spell, but it'll cast quickly. Well, if you cast Belief on that target, they're now going to actually get a big damage boost. This could be either on the mage to max out their face that they're doing more magic damage, or on the enemy so that they take more magic damage, which is a very fun tech option. That could actually make the difference between just hurting something and then having it slap you back really hard, or just nuking it from orbit and then letting you focus on other targets, get your buffs online, etc. Of course, Mystic is also good for a variety of other options, things like Quiescence to silence enemy mages, very important when you have a high faith team, so you don't just get blown up by enemy spells. Repose to put things to sleep if you just don't have what it takes to really just take them out in the exact moment, which can definitely happen, especially on Tactician. Hesitation, again, being able to disable targets, and all the other options that you have on Mystic here. So long as you have Belief, though, you'll be in a very good spot, and you'll be able to buff your team up supremely, which is a big role that Cherish wants to fulfill. She then has Time Magics, again, largely for the same reason. We want haste, and we want it now. Being able to get your team grouped up in a nice plus-shaped formation at the beginning of a battle, and putting haste on all of them, and you will put haste on all of them, because everyone's going to have good faith on this team, will massively increase the rate at which you can sling spells downrange, which is, of course, going to translate directly into more dead enemies. We then have options like Slow, again, as well if you do need to try and disable or mitigate the enemy a little bit. But the more powerful a team gets, the less likely it is they'll be using anything other than haste. We then have Parry. Now this is an interesting one because, again, Cherish is going to be on the front line, and Poles actually have an okay parry stat. This is going to allow her to go and fight on the front and deal actually very good damage with her pole once her buffing duties are done, or in between casts of things like haste, and then be able to mitigate some of the damage that she may take. It's not a guarantee, and you definitely don't want her to be as out on the front as something like Tox or Rhea, your Geomancer and your Monk, but when she is taking hits, this can help to mitigate some of that damage. We then have Double Hand, picked up off Samurai. Now, this is a little bit of an out there pick, because you do have to go all the way to Samurai to get it. But if you do have that possibility, then Double Hand is going to do a phenomenal job for you. As it says, greatly increases the attack power of weapons. And that does not mean their physical attack power. That just means the damage that they deal. So on a pole, which is scaling off of your magic attack, you'll find that you can absolutely crush in melee with this Mystic. It is always surprising to people when they see just how much damage a Mystic can do in melee if you spec them out for it. It's pretty crushing. They are legitimately magic dragoons, and they hit like it. It's awesome. Finally, then we have movement +1. Again, the higher movement plus you have, the better. You could also go with things like Mana Font, Life Font, whatever. But it is important to note that Mystics do only have 3 move at base, and because you're going to be on the front, you probably do want something like a Cloak to boost your survivability. So having something like a movement up movement ability will help you navigate around and get where you need to be a little bit better. And that is the party as a whole. So basically, how is this team going to play? It's very simple. Turn 1, you get your whole party in a plus-shaped formation or as near to it as you can, depending on the terrain. You pop haste, you pop belief, you do any other buffs that you can manage to cast. Then, as soon as your turn rolls around again, you just nuke the nearest targets and you don't stop casting spells until everything is dead. Sometimes you're going to need to take some time to heal or res someone. Sometimes you're going to need to take the chance to reapply some buffs. But after that first prep turn, this type of team has a horrifying amount of damage that they can deal, especially as you scale into the later game, can have more mana available to you, have even better spells and skills, and better equipment, so you can absolutely crush. Like, it is not uncommon to see summoners dealing across all the enemies 1,500 or more damage if they can hit a big group. It's definitely a very high risk, high reward type of comp, because if the enemy does get on your mages, they will fall very quickly. But you do then, again, have multiple different options to res them as well, so it's not the end of the world. However, it will not be anywhere near as resilient as something that has, say, some knights and some dragoons and things like that on the front line to really soak hits. So you are going to have to be a little cagey with how you play, and it will very often wind up being the case that the enemy approaches, you start casting your spells, and then you start walking backwards as your spells are charging to keep making distance for yourself. Because you sometimes will need that time to let your spells go off and start dropping the enemy front line without letting them get on your front line, or God forbid, your back line. You do also have other options that you can incorporate into this team as well if you wanted something that wasn't as reliant on faith, or something that will help to boost your overall turn 1 buffing capabilities. Something like a Samurai to be able to put Protect and Shell on your entire team on turn 1 would be absolutely beneficial for you, and would give you a ton of AoE healing as well. You just wouldn't have as much mana healing, but you could very easily drop something like the Geomancer, or potentially even the Mystic, to get that sort of buffing potential online. And on certain maps where you wind up starting very close to the enemy, closer than you may be able to really handle while still getting your staging turn, having that ability to get big heals and big AoE buffs could be very, very nice. It is even the possibility that you could put some Eido on, say, your Black Mage, and give them that capability rather than having items, but for this point in the game. It's not as likely that you have a super powerful samurai. You might not even have the necessary katanas for that. So just having items is a very good fallback as well. Overall, though, I love this team. It definitely feels odd, but if you really lean into that magic side of things, it will be very difficult for the enemy to do anything about it. You could run into issues with low faith enemies or things that can cast silence or atheism or whatever, but that's fairly few and far between that you're going to run into those types of scenarios. And if there is something like that that's on the field and maybe a danger to you, just cast Flare or a big summon on it and make it go away. That's the beauty of this type of team comp. If you haven't tried an all-magic comp before, I do highly recommend that you give it a shot. And hell, you even wind up speccing into Arithmetician later if you really wanted to, and that'll make it even more fun. That said, though, this has been the mid-game mages comp video. My name, of course, has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Whether it is this team that you decide to use, or you just steal the ideas that we have in play here to create a very interesting custom team of your own, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Tell us what it is that you're making. Tell us what you would do to further optimize this team through the mid game into the late game. Just have some fun discussions, because that's the whole point of this type of video. Who doesn't like a good paladin, right? Heavy armor, shields and swords, the power of the gods in their very hands to heal or to harm. It's a fun time in pretty much any game that it exists in, and fortunately, while it's not a specific job in Final Fantasy Tactics, the game systems do allow you to make your own. That's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Today we're diving more deeply into my Paladin build that has been seeing great success on Tactician mode of the Ivalice Chronicles, which we talked about shortly during my Steal This Squad video that we did yesterday. Say hello to Kedro, everyone. Hi, Kedro. Kedro's been an absolute centerpiece unit for my team in every major battle that I've gone into, and what's cool is while the specific gear that I have on him now needs to wait until Chapter 3, you can get a build like this going as early as Chapter 1, as really all you need is white magic and the night job, and you're already off to the races. So what is the purpose of the Paladin build? The Paladin is meant to stand on the front lines, draw enemy aggro, be nearly invulnerable in melee combat, and then be able to either smite his foes with holy magic or buff up and support himself and his allies using things like Cure, Cura, Protect, Shell, etc. Potentially even tossing in arrays here and there if you don't have a Phoenix Down handy or something equivalent. It's always been a particularly fun build to me in past versions of FFT, but now because enemies are cranked up a fair bit in Tactician and damage is not the most reliable thing, having something that can give you some longevity and tank on the front line suddenly feels a lot more valuable. So with that general overview out of the way, let's talk about the build itself. Near the beginning of Chapter 4, this is where Kedro is currently at. He's wielding a Defender, an Aegis Shield, a Circlet, a Wizard's Robe, and an Elven Cloak. His abilities are Arts of War, of course, as well as White Magics, Parry, Defense Boost, and Movement +1. Obviously, depending on where you're at in the game, what other jobs you've dipped into to pick up different options for support abilities, movement abilities, and the like, you could have different options going on here, but for my progress without an obscene amount of grinding, this is where we're currently at. He's also sitting comfortably at 84 Brave and 80 Faith. I will be continuing to work on both of those till he's eventually at 97 Brave and 84 Faith, and that'll put him in a pretty good spot to be able to do everything that he needs for tanking and for healing. First of all, let's talk about why he has equipped what he has. The beautiful thing about knights in Final Fantasy Tactics is they're actually fairly versatile because they don't need to wear exclusively plate mail. You can actually wear things like robes, which can give you a variety of different beneficial effects from boosted MP to boosted magic attack, potentially even boosting your own holy magic, depending on what it is that you're using. This is very important as some of the best white magic can be pretty pricey in terms of MP, and you want to be able to make sure that you're actually able to cast the spells that you need when you need them. Knights also notoriously not the highest magic attack unit, so having something like a robe that can boost that magic attack for you is lovely and will make your heals that bit more effective. The core of the build rests on the fact that knights are so naturally durable. You could do a support build like this on any variety of other different types of jobs, but knights having the innate ability to wield knight swords, wield shields, have good baseline HP, and then be able to use things like Arts of War to disable and otherwise weaken enemy units on the front line as they're tanking them, means that even if you are wearing a squishy wizard's robe, you're still fairly durable on the front line even when you do sometimes take hits. As I mentioned, you don't need to have this level of gear to get this build online. As soon as you unlock knights, you can basically start running them, even if you're just wielding an iron sword and a hempen robe with a basic bronze shield or something. Like, it doesn't matter, a buckler even, who cares? It'll still fulfill the same role, it'll just get stronger as you get further into the game. For the build as we have it here, this is why we're running what we are. The Defender is the first Night Sword that you can get in the game, and you will be able to get it as soon as you're able to access Chapter 3, because you can poach Elder Trents to get this from the Poacher's shop. This is something I've talked about in a few previous different videos, so we won't go too in-depth on it here. You can check out my poaching guide for more info if you need it. The Defender itself is phenomenal though, as it does deal very good damage as a Night Sword, they all do, but it has a massive 60% parry rate if you're using it with the parry ability, which is very, very fun. It doesn't have any other special bonus effects or anything like that. It's just a giant hunk of iron that you can hold up in front of yourself to defend yourself. But for this type of build, that's phenomenal. We then have the Aegis Shield, which is a little bit of a more out there choice, as it has a much greater magical parry chance than physical parry chance. It'll still provide a little bit of physical parry, but not nearly as much as any other shield will. The two big aspects to this are the fact that it also raises your magic attack power. We've talked about why that's important for this build is, if you're going to be casting healing magic, you want it to actually do something. But then it also will protect you from magic, which would otherwise be a vulnerability of the job. You see, parry will allow you to block physical attacks perfectly fine. That's what the Defender is for. But if something decides to try and drop a flare on you, you want to be able to be in a better position, and the Aegis Shield is what will help you do that. With the combination of these two main hand items, you will be naturally very difficult to take down, and that's before we start incorporating any other accessories or defensive abilities. We then just have a circlet. It's a basic plate helmet, that's just what I have available to me. There's certainly far better options that you can get as you progress into the game, especially some options that might actually give you different bonus effects, but right now with where I'm at, it's what I've got. We then have the Wizard's Robe, and as mentioned, this is a very important item as it actually gives us a decent MP pool to work with, and then also does raise our magic attack power by 2, which is very good. It's a generally stat-wise weak item for this point in the game. You can start getting them midway through Chapter 2, but at this point, it is by far the best casting robe that you can have. If you want to go for a more defensive item like, say, a black robe or a white robe because they have higher stats, the white robe even will have fire, ice, and lightning damage, that is certainly an option. You just need to keep in mind that you're not going to be doing as much healing. You can see our magic attack is dropping by 2 by going to equip this item. Even something like the Chameleon Robe could be okay. Grants you immunity to instant KO, not the most common effect, but would be a way that something might try to down this job, so that is nice. And it would allow you to absorb holy damage as well, which is certainly thematic, and could be fun if you have a way to do like AoE holy nukes, but those aren't very common, especially at this point in the game. So you can switch off of something like the Wizard's Robe, but I found that the magic attack boost that it gives and the overall durability of the job in other ways makes it a very solid option. We finally then have the Elven Cloak, and once again, cloaks are pretty much just a linear path. Every once in a while, you'll have something like the Mage's Cloak that also gives you magic attack up, but we have enough magic attack at this point, and getting a flat 25% to physical and magical evade with the cloak makes this job even more durable. Eventually, I do want to get up to things like Featherweave Cloaks by the end of the game, which I've had experienced in the past in other versions of Final Fantasy Tactics. Gets ridiculous on a build like this. You can scale this up or down, no matter what part of the game that you're in, you'll be able to find gear that suits this. For example, once you're able to get into Midlight's Deep, you can get the Lordly Robe. Oh boy, getting physical attack and magical attack and good stats, it's a good time. That's part of what I like about this job so much, because it does just scale so well. You can get someone set up in the job, set them and forget them. That's why Kejo here has a whopping almost 5,000 JP to his name, because it doesn't take long to get the job set up, and then you can just rip and let him defend other characters while they get more complicated builds online. Speaking of the other parts of the build, we do of course have Arts of War. It's the Knight ability. You want to get all of the abilities so that no matter what situation you're in, you can potentially rend the relevant thing. Being able to destroy a powerful weapon on a dangerous enemy, cool. Being able to rend their speed or their magic or their MP in case there's like a samurai or a geomancer that you can't block the damage from. Well, if you can't kill them outright, you can make it so that they take less turns or they do less damage when they do take their turn. It's a very solid option to have. It's not going to be what you're using a ton, but when it is needed, it is very nice to have. More often, if you're not doing basic attacks, you'll be using your white magics, and Kejo has a decent array here already. Cure, Cura, and Curago, Raise, Arise, Regen to put on yourself can be very nice when you're first running into the fight. Protect and Shell to be able to buff up the whole party. Wall, typically again, cast on yourself to make you even more ridiculously durable. Asuna for important status effects, and then if you feel like bringing the hammer down, Holy. It's a very fun setup. It gives you a lot of different ways you can support either yourself or the team, depending on the combat scenario that you're in, with the option to just hit the delete button if and when you need to. And sometimes you will. It is important to keep in mind that without any sort of outside support like ethers or a monk to regen MP, if you drop Holy with this item set currently, that's about all you're going to be doing with your magic for the rest of that fight, but it can very often remove a key piece without any major issues, and then of course you can just start swinging your sword around. So when you need to do it, it is viable. We then have parry. Parry is a key part of the build because without it, your defender is not going to be able to parry, but with it, you are very difficult to hit. Now listen, I can already hear there's going to be people who say, just get Shira Hidori, it's better for this build because it's going to be able to give you evasion based off your brave, etc., etc. I totally hear you on that, and that is a very reasonable option to go for by the late game for this build. However, to get to that point, you're going to have to get all the way down to Samurai, which at that point you're going through Knight, you're going through Monk, you're going through Dragoon, and then you have to get the amount of JP to unlock it. It can be done, but the nice thing about parry is it does come from the job that you're going to be in. So until you're ready to go and get that set up, if you don't feel like doing a bunch of grinding as you progress through the game, then parry will be there for you. Now, I do recommend going to get Shira Hidori eventually because you will probably at some point want to put a better Knight Sword on that gives you a beneficial effect. A Save the Queen, for example, or an Excalibur to boost your Holy and give you haste. There are good options for this that I just don't have access to at this point in the game. Once you do, getting Shira Hidori so you still have that evade is definitely a good option. We then do have defense boost. Again, depending on what defensive options you have, you may want to swap this for things like, say, magic defense boost or the like. But as of right now, if you wind up missing your parry or something gets you from behind or something along those lines, then having defense boost that you take less damage is definitely a nice option. Dipping into Mystic, getting magic defense boost, or maybe even going for something else defensive is certainly a solid option. This, again, is a very versatile job that you can build from as you get further into the game. And then same thing for movement +1. If eventually you want to dip into Thief to get movement +2, Time Mage for teleport, you have options for your movement ability. But right now, as it is, 4 base move, pretty okay for something that's just going to go sit on the front line and absorb hits. Also, correction, I said Mystic for magic defense boost. It is White Mage that gives you magic defense boost. I always get them reversed in my head. But either way, you can pick that up and maybe even swap it on the fly for different combat scenarios that you're going to find yourself in. So with the general idea of the build, an example of the equipment and abilities you'll have later into the game out of the way, what's going to be the quickest way to get this online in terms of your progression through various different jobs? You're, of course, going to start in Squire. You're going to get your basics, your fundaments, your throwstone, your move +1, your JP boost, etc., etc. Get that all out of the way. You're then going to need to dip into Chemist long enough that you unlock White Mage. Fortunately, that does not take very long at all. You only need to get to a level 2 Chemist to unlock White Mage, so that's quite simple. You can then do one of two things. You can either go right into White Mage to get your various different magics that you want unlocked, maybe then go into Mystic if you're going to get defense boost, or you can go directly into Knight and start mastering that. It doesn't matter too much which way you go first, because at the end of the day, the stats that you're going to gain in either class really won't be huge. You're not going to be in them for that long. You're going to be ending in Knights. So you'll be getting your Knight growths for the rest of the game. If you decide that you want to start dipping into other jobs to get different reaction abilities, again, like Shira Hidori on Samurai, then you can do that. But I mean, once you've gotten your defense boost from Mystic, you're pretty much just in Knight and White Mage for all the abilities that you could possibly want for this setup. Parry comes from Knight. Magic defense boost comes from White Mage. Move +1 you should already have because you were in Squire, and then you can always jump down to Thief through Archer if you really want to get move +2. In fact, I can do that for him right now, so look at that. There you go. Now he's got movement +2. And that's the nice thing about the spillover mechanic is eventually you'll just get access to these abilities without even needing to necessarily dip into the job for any significant length of time. That's part of why I like this build so much. It is so very easy to get online and then just continue to upgrade without having to go all over the shop of all the different jobs. Like, well, we're going to go into Time Mage so we can get Swiftness, but then I want to get Mana Font from like Mystic, or then so I can have more mana that I'm getting back, but then like I need to spend plenty of time in White Mage so that I have all my white magic. Also, I need to make sure that I'm mastering everything from Knight. But what if I want to then go down to Samurai to get Shira Hidori? Like, some builds like that to optimize could take quite a while to get to. But if you just want a dude who can stand on the front line and do support, you got it, and without very much jumping between jobs. And I can tell you, on modes like Tactician, where you do need to pay a lot more attention to avoiding damage and making sure that you can protect allies who can't avoid it for themselves, it's a very strong option to have. In a game that's all about Zodiac stones and Zodiac braves, you would imagine that the Zodiac system in Final Fantasy Tactics is probably pretty important. And it is, to a degree. It's also nowhere near as difficult to understand as people would have you believe, so today we're going to talk about exactly how it works and how you can use it to make your teams that little bit more efficient. And on Tactician, you might want to be thinking about doing that. So the Zodiac system, this is one of those things, much like Brave and Faith, that people seem to get extremely confused by when they first start to get into Final Fantasy Tactics, in no small part because very oftentimes they will have people tell them that it is very difficult to understand, that it's not well explained, etc., etc. And some of those things are true, or at least they were, until the release of the Ivalice Chronicles. Now though, the system has been trimmed down a little bit to be a little bit more of a smooth flowing operation, and the tutorialization in the game is much stronger, so it's a lot easier to actually dive in and see what it is that you're looking at. In case that's too much for you, or you would just rather listen to a tutorial rather than actually go in and read it in the menu itself, which is totally understandable. I know I very often like to digest my information that way. I've put everything together here in terms of how the system works and then how you can properly use it to make the most of your team members. We're also going to be talking about the fact that it's not really a system that you should be worried about in terms of what the enemy has due to the huge variety of units that you can wind up running into on the board, with a couple of exceptions that we'll discuss at the end. First off though, how does the system actually work and what is it? If you're not aware, every single unit in the game, yours or the opponent's, human or monster, will have a Zodiac sign associated with it, and in battle you can see it right here above a character's portrait. These are the typical signs of the Zodiac as you would see them in real life, and they don't actually have a direct effect on any of your stats or really anything to do with your unit whatsoever. What they actually do is change the way that your units interact with each other and with the enemy. When interacting with another unit, you will have one of 4 potential different states that you will find yourself in: a positive state, a negative state, a best state, and a neutral state. And these states will change depending on what the relationship is between the Zodiac signs that you and the opposing unit have. If you have a positive state or a positive relationship, you will get a boost of around 25% to damage, accuracy, chance of spell effects landing, etc. for spells that do actually wind up relating to this system, which we will talk about. If you're negative, you'll have about a net 25% nerf to those things. If you have the best possible affinity, it will be a 50% boost, and if it's neutral, then nothing changes. You're just going based off of your normal stats. Each sign has 2 other signs that it has a positive relationship with, so a 25% boost, 2 that it is negative with, so a 25% nerf, and 1 that it has the best compatibility with, that is that 50% boost. However, it is very important to keep in mind that if you're looking at monster units, the best is actually reversed and will then become a negative, leading to a 25% nerf. This is something to keep in mind if you do want to make common use of monsters. You might want to consider what Zodiac signs they have and what Zodiac signs your team has before you wind up recruiting them. There's also no worst relationship in the game, so the greatest negative that you're going to wind up having will be that 25%. I'm not going to go through every single sign and what compatibility it has here, just because that would take a long time. It would basically just be a bunch of reading. You can find a list of all the compatibilities in the Chronicle under Lessons in the Advanced tab, and I also have a handy dandy little graph that all of us old heads from ye olden days of Final Fantasy Tactics discussion have used, where you can see all the different compatibilities here. I will have that linked in the description as well. The only thing to keep in mind with that graph is it has additional worst pairings or additional negative pairings that used to take gender into account. However, based on testing that has been done around the internet and in my own Discord, users have found that there is no longer a gender consideration when looking at things like Zodiac. So you don't need to worry about who's what gender and what sign they have and how that changes, how the system works. It's one of the ways that the Zodiac system has been streamlined a little bit, and it makes it a little bit less of a headache to try and figure out, which I really do appreciate. As mentioned, your Zodiac compatibility is going to impact a lot of different things, from the just base damage that your physical attack does, to your chance of reviving someone with Raise or the revive skill from Monk, or the chance you're going to be able to put a beneficial or harmful status effect on something. Anything from haste to sleep to anything else like that will be impacted by your Zodiac compatibility. Even stealing, theft itself, is influenced by the will of the stars. So hey, I mean, I guess there is something to that whole fate idea, at least in the world of Final Fantasy Tactics. This means that taking Zodiac into consideration will be a major player for how you decide to set up your team and how they will be able to interact with each other. There are some skills that you don't need to worry about this quite as much with. For example, my beloved Samurai can just guaranteed put Protect and Shell on everything in AoE around them. Just guaranteed. Zodiac doesn't care. It's just a 100% chance to hit. Cool. Bang Boom Bob's your uncle, and anything else that has a 100% chance to hit like that, or just a flat amount that it does, is the same. Chemists are not going to be healing more with potions if they have a positive Zodiac relationship with you. A potion heals for what it tells you it's going to heal you for. 30, 70, 150, that's it. Flat, boom, done. However, there are far more skills and calculations that do take Zodiac into consideration than there are that do not. So we're going to talk about some ways you can get some optimized team setups going on using the Zodiac, or at least keeping it in mind. As one example of a team setup, let's look at a team that has 2 Aquarius sign support units and 3 primary combatants with the Leo sign. These signs do have best compatibility with one another, and this as such will provide the best results for healing magic, buff and resurrection targeting, etc., as we mentioned. This is just a bit of theory crafting here, as I don't have all of the units on hand that have these exact signs due to the way that we're doing our campaign challenge, but say we have a monk using Chakra and Revive as one of our support units, and that monk, he has the Aquarius sign. Then, alongside him, we have a black mage with time magic as another Aquarius. Then our 3 primary combatants would be, say, a ninja, a knight, and a dragoon, all again with the Leo signs. What this means is that when you need to heal someone with chakra, or give them MP back, or revive them with your monk, you will have a 50% boost to the effectiveness of that skill on all of those allies. You'll be more reliably able to revive them. You'll restore more health with chakra, and then if you have any other secondary abilities or anything like that equipped, most likely they will be affected by this as well. Hell, maybe you have white magic on your monk because you want to be able to apply protect and shell to the party, or you want to be able to cast wall on one particular unit like your knight who's going to be super tanky and send him out there into the front line. All of those skills will be impacted by having a best compatibility with those 3 primary frontliners. Same thing goes for the Black Mage. If you want to have a party formation at the beginning of the battle where you have a plus shape on a flat plane and you want to be able to haste everyone right off the bat, having that good compatibility with the team means that more likely than not, especially if you have good faith as well, that Black Mage is guaranteed going to haste everyone in the party. Now, it is important to note that in this scenario, your Black Mage and your Monk would not have compatibility with each other, but that's fine. They're the same sign, so it would still just be neutral. You'd still be just going off of your raw stats. So if you do have good stats, you should still be able to get the effects that you need while being even stronger for the guys that are probably going to be taking the big hits on the front. As another example, let's look at a more generally supportive team where you won't have quite as much effectiveness, but more units will be able to have positive effects on each other in general throughout the party. Continuing on with our Aquarius signs from earlier, you would want Gemini and Libra to complement them. These 3 signs are all supportive of each other, so if you took just as a complete out-of-my-hat thing, 2 Aquarius, 2 Gemini, and a Libra, you would have neutral to positive benefits for the entire party. Again, you wouldn't get benefits for the 2 Aquarius with each other or the 2 Gemini for each other, but everyone else, they would be able to give boosts to and receive boosts from. And obviously having mostly positive with some just neutral is way better than the potential of having any negative whatsoever. And you could incorporate monsters into this team as well without fear of any negatives as a handy bonus. Considering that there are actually a bunch of useful monsters already, and some of them got decent buffs in the Ivalice Chronicles, there will absolutely be times that you do want to incorporate them into your party. With this type of a setup, again, pretty much any healing, buffs, or support that you throw around to the team will be getting nice bonuses, and you won't be sweating as much when it comes down to a clutch support ability going off for revive as you might be if you have mainly neutral or even negative relationships with each other. And again, it's not like these are the only 3 signs you can do this with. You can browse through the advanced section, or again, cross-reference the graph that I've posted earlier and that you'll have on the screen here as well, and see what signs it is that you might need. Largely, you're going to be basing this around what your Ramza's sign is. If you have a specific birth date that you like to use for him, I always use my own, so I'm an Aquarius with Ramza. If you really want to be min-maxing, you'll want to make sure that he fits into that formation and then choose all of your other signs around that, whether it be because you're recruiting enemies off the battlefield who happen to have the right sign, or at the very beginning of the game, you go through, boot out your whole party, and then just recruit characters that have the signs that you want. The earlier you do this, the better, because obviously you'll have more time to just level those characters and grind them up. But you can technically always reset this just so long as you're willing to put in the grind to get those characters caught up. If you wanted to get even deeper into this, whether it be for a future run through or you just really like to have all your ducks in a row before you start a new game, you can look up all of the other unique characters that you'll be able to recruit, choose which ones you eventually want to have on your team, and then build your generics around who's going to have complementary signs with them as well, though really you probably don't need to get that intense with it. You can if you want, and that's one of the beauties of a game like this. It lets you really dive as deep as you feel like, but I'm not going to say that it's necessary or even really recommended, especially for your first run. Now, as mentioned, I have a pretty eclectic mix of characters on my team currently because of the supporter challenge run that I'm doing, where I just have to use the characters that channel supporters and viewers submit to me that are completely customized them down to their Zodiac sign if they so chose. So I don't necessarily have all the best compatibilities here, but we do have some good options we can take a look at. For example, Izzy here, my white mage in training to fill the ranks of the recently deceased. If you haven't seen the most recent streams, it's gotten pretty bloody out there, so we need some replacements. Izzy here has the Gemini sign. His magic will pair really well with my Ramza, who's an Aquarius, again like myself. He will pair best with Sagittarius though, which is actually great because I have my currently monk, soon-to-be knight Dagny here. He's going to be able to do a lot to heal her, give her support buffs, res her if she gets downed. It will be a very nice pairing, while also still being able to get some bonuses when working with Ramza and any other characters that I choose to add to the team that have complementary signs. Notably though, he will not enjoy working with Twilight, who's a Pisces and one of my other very strong characters. So if I'm going to have them on the same team together, I might want to take into consideration that negative relationship and maybe have other guaranteed ways to support her in case Izzy isn't able to give her what she needs when we're down to the wire and maybe she needs to be rezzed or something. Now, we've talked quite a bit about party building and how you can use the Zodiac system to your advantage to make your team a lot more compatible and work better together. And that is definitely the biggest use case for this system. Again, there's going to be so many different enemies that you encounter over the course of the game, random enemies and just enemies in story battles, with a number of units that can be on the field at any given time. Trying to plan for and accommodate and work towards having a team that can handle like any different Zodiac combination that the enemy could provide, really not going to be the most beneficial thing for you. And again, it is a two-way street anyway, so even if you want to be able to maximize damage against the enemy by always knowing what Zodiac sign they have and deploying units that are going to take advantage of that, they're going to be able to take that same advantage against you as well. So really not something that you want to spend a ton of your time working on. So long as you have a team that can buff each other up, heal when necessary, and generally be supportive of each other, that's already most likely going to be enough of a boost, even on Tactician, to get you through whatever it is that you need to get through. That said, there are two major exceptions to this case, and that's what we're talking about here now. Keep in mind as well, these are both spoiler fights. If you don't want to know about a late game Chapter 3 battle and a late game Chapter 4 battle against major characters, you're going to want to click away now. You can jump to the end of the video with this timestamp here, where I'll just briefly go over what it is that I'm talking about more in detail with these two characters. I'll give you 5 seconds to jump away now if you don't want to know. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the characters that we're talking about here are Wiegraf at Ivalice Castle at the end of Chapter 3, and Elmdor near-ish to the end of Chapter 4, maybe more the midway point of Chapter 4 at Limbury Castle. The reasons for this are similar, but unique to each character. The Wiegraf fight, as anyone who knows this game knows, is notoriously difficult due to the fact that it is a one-on-one at first between Ramza and Wiegraf before you get to Phase 2. And considering that Wiegraf is a very powerful Holy Knight, and Ramza doesn't even have his high-level Devout Knight job yet, so he doesn't even have some of his best abilities and equipment, this can be an extremely brutal fight for Ramza. If Wiegraf is dealing bonus damage to you on top of that because of complementary signs, even worse. This is already a fight that you have to get very intelligent with in terms of how you're going to deal with it if you haven't just, overground, which is always a possibility. And then if you're on Tactician, it can be even more nasty, with most people having to resort to what feels like some sort of a cheese build to be able to overcome it, again, without just being massively overleveled and dual punching him into the ground. Wiegraf has the Zodiac sign Virgo, meaning that if your Ramza has the Gemini or Sagittarius signs, you're going to be in for a really rough duel. Again, not unwinnable by any means, but your damage is going to be even lower than normal against Wiegraf here, and your chance of landing debuffs or messing with his gear will have very poor accuracy. As such, especially if you're planning on playing on Tactician, that is going to be something you're going to want to keep in mind when you're choosing a birth date for Ramza. You might want to steer away from Gemini or Sagittarius, or if you're dead set on having those signs, because maybe that's your birthday and you want to use your birthday, which is fine, know that that's going to be a really difficult fight, and you are really going to have to prepare for it. Meanwhile, jumping to Chapter 4 and the battle with Elmdor, Marquis Elmdor himself, or Marquis as the game would say, in Limbury Castle. The actual fight here is tough, yes, but the main challenge with Elmdor is stealing the Genji gear and his sword. And considering that Elmdor himself is an extremely powerful combatant, and he has two nasty assassins that turn into demons who can either deal massive amounts of just raw damage, or instant kill you or put you to sleep or do other nasty stuff. It's definitely going to be something that people will struggle with if they want to get all 5 pieces of gear off of Elmdor. As such, to make your chances just that little bit better, you're going to want a thief with either the Libra or Aquarius sign to take advantage of Elmdor's Gemini sign, as this will boost the accuracy of the steal command. This can actually give you a pretty decent boost, going from anywhere from like 15 to 25% chances to steal to 30 or even as high as like 45, 48%. And I'll take a 50%-ish chance, a coin flips chance, over like a 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 chance any day of the week when I've got vampires and demons bearing down on me. This can of course also be accompanied by like rending Elmdor's stats and stuff, but that's a topic for a different day. We're not getting into that right now. Beyond those 2 fights, though, there's very little real reason that you need to worry about what Zodiac signs other characters have. Most other fights in the game you can manage better with just tactics and good loadouts than necessarily having min-maxed bonuses, but if you do want to get into it, you're always free to look forward and see what sorts of Zodiac signs various different bosses and dangerous enemies in the game might have. So long as you have beneficial signs, or at least are aware of your characters that have negative signs with each other, you can usually work around it and find success even on Tactician. And that's pretty much the Zodiac system. As always, if there's anything that I missed, anything you feel I should have touched on, or, God forbid, anything that I was incorrect about, do please let me know in the comments. I took extra time researching this video, trying to make sure that I had everything hammered out, especially since we knew that some changes, like the no longer considering gender thing for the signs, had happened in the Ivalice Chronicles, so I wanted to make sure I had all my ducks in a row, wanted to make sure that I had all the information correct before I presented it, because even though I've been playing this game for almost 3 decades now, things like the Zodiac system have always been kind of background knowledge for me. I've never really talked about it very much with others. So my apologies if there is anything that is incorrect, but as far as I'm aware, this should all be good to go. Do you enjoy divesting your enemies of their gear, whether to make them weaker in combat or so you can add it to your own personal collection? Do you like knowing that a fancy sword showing up on the enemy side of the battlefield means you are about to acquire a new fancy piece of gear for yourself? If you answer yes, then this is the video for you. So yes, today, I mean, the name's the game, right? We're talking about steal, we're talking about thieves, we're talking about how you can most efficiently actually get gear off of the opponent using what is seemingly a self-explanatory system, but which can be very difficult to actually use properly due to low hit rates and knowing how to make an enemy susceptible to your grubby little mitts, all that type of fun stuff. We're going to talk about what thieves actually do and how you should be using them, how the steal skill is calculated and how it functions, and then an example of the most optimal way that you can build out a general thief. And we'll talk about why I say general as we get into how the whole system works. So first off, what are thieves and what do they steal? If you're not already aware, thieves are one of the jobs in Final Fantasy Tactics that I refer to as more of a meta job, similar to the mediator / orator or things like that, where you don't really want to be using them in combat. You want to learn their skills and use their skills typically on other types of characters to then get a meta advantage. People will say, of course, yes, you can steal gear off of an opponent to make it so that they can't actually use it against you, and that is fair, but there are other maybe more efficient ways to be able to do things like that. Really, what you're doing is looking at usually a boss enemy or maybe a random enemy that has a higher tier of gear than you can currently buy or something along those lines and saying, I want that, let me have it, and using steal to your advantage with that. There are a couple of combat utility things that thieves are able to do, such as charming opponents, but they're very limited in that regard, and the actual stats and gear choices of the class are fairly poor as well. They're functional while you're using them to get their jobs points up and get their skills unlocked, but once you're at that point, you pretty much want to ollie out of the job as fast as you possibly can. As far as the steal skill itself is concerned, you have multiple different options. Steal Gil, Steal Heart, and Steal XP are not ones that we're really going to be talking about here. They're tangential at best. Sometimes they have some use. What we really care about are the equipment stealing abilities. So Steal Weapon, Shield, Helm, Armor, and Accessory. These are the ones that you're going to be gunning for first. There's a reason that they're also the most expensive in the list for the most part. And once you have them, you can really start to pick and choose what types of gear you want to be able to snag. It's not unwarranted to always have at least one character in your party that does have the steal skill equipped if you do feel like always being able to grab something if it would be advantageous for you to do so. And now with the changes in the Ivalice Chronicles where you can actually preview random battles, it's even easier to know if you should be bringing a thief along with you or not, because you can look and see what enemies are on the board and what gear they might have. As you learn the game and do successive runs, you'll also kind of get a feel and eventually maybe just straight up memorize what enemies are on what maps for story battles, so you'll kind of know when and where you want to bring a thief for that as well. And I want to be very clear about this. From here on in the guide, whenever I say bring a thief, I don't literally mean the job, but just a character who can steal, who will be fulfilling the role of thief for you. So with the general overview out of the way, how does the steal skill actually work? Because you probably know if you've tried to steal anything before, your odds are generally pretty poor. Very rare to see anything above like 40% if you're not really min-maxing and know how to make the system work in your advantage. So at baseline, the base level calculation for the success rate of a steal is very simple. It is just the percent chance that the skill has attached to it, and then the user's speed gets added onto it, and that's your baseline. There will be modifiers to that based on a lot of other factors, and that's what we're going to talk about here, and will probably constitute the biggest chunk of the video. But that is your base. For example, barring any changes that have been made in the Ivalice Chronicles, and I certainly have not noticed any, I haven't seen any chatter about any either, something like Steel Helmet has a success rate of 40 plus your speed versus Steel Weapon, which has a success rate of 30 plus your speed. So certain pieces of gear will be harder to steal than others, but not by an insane amount or anything like that. So of course, your natural conclusion will probably be, so I want a character that has the highest speed possible with gear that boosts it, leveling in a class that has good speed, maybe give them more speed other ways, and that's how I'm going to get that percent chance up, right? And you're not wrong. That is absolutely a factor. However, there's a lot of other things at play here as well. The big first one is just enemy evasion and what direction they're facing. So like many other skills in the game, whether they be spells, attacks, debuffs, whatever, enemies will have a chance to evade it if they have either just natural evasion due to the facing that they have on you. Head on gives the best evasion, from the side gives a little bit, and from behind gives none, as well as if they have any particular gear that is going to be boosting it, or if they have any skills that's going to be boosting it. And that evade chance is going to directly take off of your steal skill. This technically affects everything in the game, like your basic attacks and stuff, but most of those attacks have a much higher chance of hitting than your steal skills do. So you're less likely to see it in general scenarios and feel it much worse when you are trying to steal. This means that anything that does modify or change evasion will have a major impact on how your steal chance is going to be. Enemies that have shields or cloaks are going to be way harder to actually handle in terms of getting that steal to go through, as well as enemies that have defensive skills like parry or Shira Hidori or any of the like. For those of you who are familiar with trying to steal the Genji armor, a lot of these things will be coming up in your mind right now. Don't worry, we will have a whole video dedicated just to that battle and how to successfully steal the Genji armor sometime after this one goes out. I wanted to do the general guide first. Fortunately, it's not all advantages for the enemy, as you do also have ways that you can manipulate things in your favor as well. We already talked about having high speed, that's definitely a good one. However, skills like Attack Boost and Brawler, coming off of Geomancer and Monk respectively, will also give you a boost to your chance to steal, which is actually really nice and a lot of people don't realize it. So you definitely want at least one, if not both of those, and we'll talk about that, on a character that is going to be doing the stealing. You then have Concentration as another support ability that can help. A lot of people call this one out. Personally, not as big of a fan of that one, but we'll talk about it in a minute here. And then finally, what Zodiac alignment you have, much like with pretty much anything else, can negatively or positively impact your ability to steal. So if you know that there's a particular boss or enemy that has a set Zodiac sign that you really want to make sure that you can steal from, again, thinking about the Genji armor, this is a big one, then you're going to want to have a character that does have one of the best possible Zodiac alignments with that character to increase your chance to actually steal from them. As far as what does not impact success rate, but I've seen people say before, haste. Haste does not impact the success rate of your stealing because it's not directly modifying your actual speed stat. It's giving you a temporary buff that is increasing your speed, but it doesn't change the speed on your actual character sheet. Kind of like the difference between casting the belief spell on someone to give them a temporary bump to their faith that doesn't actually impact their full score, and once that buff runs out, then they'll just be back to their baseline, whereas actually preaching at them will increase that faith score. It's the same type of thing here. If you're looking to use a skill to boost speed, even temporarily, to be able to make your success rates with stealing better, you're going to be wanting to look at things that Ramza has, like Tailwind, or if you're using him as the thief, Shout, to give yourself or your thief that speed boost to increase their steal rate marginally over time. The other big thing that people seem to get confused about that does not impact your success rate is what job you have equipped. So long as you have the right setup of skills and stats and gear, anyone can be a thief. There will be some jobs that are better at it because of the stats that they have, but it's not an intrinsic trait of any particular job itself that makes it better. A knight that has the exact same stats as a ninja will have the exact same chance to steal if you have them set up the same way and they have the same Zodiac sign, all that type of fun stuff. So don't stress too much. If you have a particular type of character that runs a particular job and you just want to have steal on them as a backup so that they can try and actually yoink something for you, cool. Totally fine. Don't need to worry about that whatsoever. I used a knight to steal all of Elmdor's gear to get the Genji gear. Like, you can do whatever, it's fine. Circling back to concentration. Concentration can be a good option to be able to steal from enemies if you are trying to negate their evade bonus. So what concentration does is just that. It completely negates the enemy's ability to evade. It does not actually give a percent chance increase to the steal skill, even if it feels like it does, because it's mitigating that evasion. While this can be nice, there are plenty of other ways that you can mitigate evasion as well. So you're really better off supporting your thief by mitigating evasion through like destroying a cloak or destroying a shield if it's not what you're trying to steal, using a rend ability, for example. A ton of different ways you can go about this, and then you can actually focus the skills on your thief towards boosting that baseline percentage, making it as good as possible through things like attack boost and brawler. So let's look at an example character to be set up as an extremely strong thief. Here I have a monk set up to do exactly that, and I'll talk about why. Monk is the best baseline thief because they're able to have both attack boost and brawler. Monks do have brawler built in innately, so you can then also equip attack boost on top of that and stack both buffs, and this is the only job in the game that can do this. They don't have the ability to wear helms, so you're not going to be able to put something like a thief hat on them to get that speed boost, but that's only going to be an increase of a couple percentage points compared to the total cumulative buff that you get from having both boosting skills on, so it's really not a big loss whatsoever. Combined with the fact that Monk has pretty decent survivability due to its ability to spam chakra on itself to keep its HP up, and you have a pretty solid character just at baseline to then start building on from there. Once you have your thief themselves set up, how you go about handling actually stealing the gear can be very different depending on what type of heist, I suppose you could say, it is that you're trying to do. If there's a random knight on the Mondalia Plains that has a rune blade before you're able to buy them in Chapter 4 and you want to just go grab that really quick, you don't have to get too fancy with it. Maybe just have a knight of your own to rend their shield or try to put them to sleep somehow to remove their evade chance. Then just have your monk walk up and try and get behind them and steal their stuff. Where things start to get more complicated, shall we say, is when you're trying to steal off of bosses. For example, Meliadul in Chapter 4. She has the Defender Sword and the Chantage accessory, both of which are very high demand items. They can both be acquired through poaching, but that's a lengthy process in and of itself, so if you just want to get a couple of these going right off the bat, then this is the way that you need to do it. Unfortunately, Meliadul is a very potent attacker and will be destroying your gear as you try to actually steal from her, to say nothing of the various different ninjas and summoners and the like that she brings to the battle with her. As such, you want to have a support team for your thief to neutralize those other threats and make sure that they stay alive long enough to get the job done. You also need to watch and make sure that you don't have any different weird issues with height, as like with many other skills in FFT, they are fairly limited by the height difference between you and your target. As such, you're going to want to hold back, let the boss come to you to a flat plane, and then start hitting them with various different debuffs. Rend speed is a great option just so that the boss can take less turns and buy you more time in between actions to actually try to steal their stuff, such as Intimidate through the Orator or the chicken spell that our good friend Beowulf brings to the table, even though you do get him fairly late, are also great options as it would reduce the chance of any sort of defensive actions like parry or Shira Hidori triggering. Units that can cast various different debuffs would be phenomenal as well. Being able to put the enemy boss's support team to sleep or turning them to stone or disabling them are all great ways to buy yourself more time, and if possible, matching their Zodiac sign to yours so you can increase your chances that way as well. Finally, making sure that you have a support team to actually keep your thief alive will be massively important. Even a monk can only chakra through so much, so having maybe a samurai to put Protect and Shell on, or even a white mage to do the same, something that can throw items or cast white magic to keep HP up, these will all be beneficial things to have for your thieves. You could also go the mass theft route, where you have an entire party of thieves that are all monks with different speed boosting gear and the like to be able to just bum rush the enemy and try and bear them down through full weight of numbers, but you're really rolling the dice on that. I prefer to go with one, maybe two, that I can really buff up. And yeah, again, maybe bring Ramza and dump a bunch of tailwind into them near the beginning of the fight so that they take a bunch of consecutive turns and their success rate is higher. That's an option as well. Once you have the actual build and the character online, there's so many different ways that you can back them up, just like you would any other character for any other role that you're filling in a team. The options are pretty endless, so long as you're able to keep the enemy boss suppressed. That's the big one. And that's successfully building Thieves and using steel. The moral of this story is preparation is basically the entire battle. Knowing how the steel skill works, how your calculations function, and what skills you can equip to support it, such as, again, attack, boost, and brawler, is key. Once you've got that going for you, it really just comes down to execution, and however you choose to do that should work out in one way or another. If you really want to get gamey with it, you can even use the autosave feature that the enhanced version of Ivalice Chronicles has to be able to reload a turn and keep trying to steal a piece of gear over and over again until it works. That is totally an option as well, but I know that's a little gamey and some people don't like to do that, so you still can just try and tough it out the original way and you'll get there eventually. As always, if you have any particular suggestions on how you like to set up your thieves and their support team to make it even easier for you to be able to steal stuff off of some of the most potent bosses in the game to get some of the coolest gear in the game, do let people know down in the comments. This is just a general overview. There's a ton of different ways you can go about it, and we'll be getting into some of those more specific details, especially in terms of how to survive, when we do the Elmdor Genji gear video. That'll be coming very soon. If you have any further questions, please feel free to ask, and until the next time, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, and remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.